Welcome to another quiet journey into the past, where we leave behind the noise of the present and step slowly into a world shaped by the sea. Tonight, we will drift to the windswept shores of medieval Iceland, where the life of a fisherman unfolded in steady rhythm with the tides. So now, dim your lights, close your eyes, and imagine the cold salt air brushing against your face, the muffled roar of waves on black volcanic stone, and the endless patient heartbeat of the North Atlantic. It begins, as it always does in this far northern land, with the quiet weight of the sky pressing down on the restless sea, the pale light of a winter dawn barely touching the horizon, and the vast sweep of the North Atlantic lying before you like a living thing, its slow breathing marked by the rise and fall of grey-green swells that roll endlessly toward the black volcanic shore. The wind here carries a cold that is not the sudden bite of a passing chill, but something older and deeper, a cold that has seeped into the bones of the island itself, a cold that carries the memory of glaciers and the taste of salt drawn from waters that have traveled across entire oceans to reach this place. You can feel it brushing your face, sliding beneath your cloak, settling on your hands, until it becomes as much a part of you as your own breath. The land is quiet at this hour, not with the silence of stillness, but with the softer hush of a place that has learned to live in tune with the ocean's voice. Even before you can see it, you can hear the sea, not a roar, but a deep, steady murmur that fills the air like the sound of distant conversation, a sound that has been speaking to those who live here for as long as anyone can remember. The rocks along the coast are dark and slick with spray, their jagged shapes softened only by the long work of the waves. Between them, narrow strips of pebble and coarse sand mark the place where the land meets the water, the meeting point where so much of life in medieval Iceland begins and ends. Above, the sky stretches low, heavy with drifting layers of cloud that move slowly, as if reluctant to leave the shelter of the mountains. The light that filters through is muted, tinged with silver where it touches the sea, and with a faint blue where it falls across the snow-covered slopes inland. The air smells of salt and seaweed, and somewhere beneath it all there is the faint, sharp scent of fish, not unpleasant, but simply part of the truth of this place, part of the way the sea leaves its mark on everything it touches. If you stand here long enough, you notice the small signs of life that exist on the edge of this vast wilderness of water. A gull drifts lazily above the waves, its wings motionless as it lets the wind carry it along. Farther out, dark shapes move briefly on the surface before vanishing again, perhaps seals, perhaps nothing more than the shadows of waves. And always, there is the shifting light on the water, the way it catches on each crest, breaking into countless tiny flashes before fading again into the deeper green below. In the Middle Ages, this coastline was more than just a place of beauty or danger. It was the heartbeat of survival. The interior of Iceland, with its lava fields, glaciers, and sparse pasture land, could not feed all who lived here, and so the people turned to the sea, to the cold, rich waters that promised fish enough to see them through the long winters. But the sea gave its gifts only on its own terms, and those terms could change in an instant. Calm waters could rise into deadly storms within the hour. Gentle breezes could turn to icy gales that froze the skin and numbed the fingers, until even the simplest task became a struggle. And yet for those who lived along this coast, the ocean was not merely a force to be feared. It was a companion, constant and necessary, as much a part of daily life as the land beneath their feet. Every sound, every shift in the wind, every change in the color of the waves carried meaning. A certain tilt of the clouds on the horizon might signal weather that would make fishing impossible for days. A sudden abundance of seabirds might hint at shoals of fish moving closer to shore. The fisherman who learned these signs could return home with his boat heavy with the sea's bounty. The one who ignored them might never return at all. If you look inland from the shore, you will see how the land rises gently at first, then sharply into the hills and mountains that guard the island's heart. Scattered along the lower slopes, you find the small turf-roofed houses of the fishing villagers, their walls built of earth and stone, their roofs green with grass in summer and white with snow in winter. Smoke curls slowly from their low chimneys, mingling with the mist that drifts in from the sea. The people who live here, know the sound of the waves as well as they know the sound of their own voices, for it is the ocean that shapes the rhythm of their days. Standing here, it is easy to imagine the fisherman who will soon walk down to the shore, carrying with him the tools of his trade, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. He will pause, as he always does, to look out over the water, reading its surface for signs that only years of experience can interpret. He will feel the cold breath of the Atlantic on his face, and know whether it speaks of danger or of welcome. And then, if the sea allows it, he will push his small boat into the waves, trusting the same currents that have carried his father and his grandfather before him. There is something timeless about this moment. The stillness before departure, the quiet weight of decision, the unspoken conversation between man and sea. The fisherman does not expect the ocean to be kind, nor does he ask for kindness. He asks only that it allow him passage, that it permit him to take from its depths what he needs to live. In return, he offers respect, care in his work, and the acceptance that the sea will always have the final word. As the light grows a little stronger, the horizon begins to take on more shape, the line between sea and sky becoming sharper. You can see now the faint outline of distant headlands, their dark forms softened by the mist. The water near the shore shifts in color from deep green to a paler, almost translucent hue, where the sandy bottom shows faintly through. The tide is neither high nor low, and the gentle pull of the water is enough to rock a small boat if one were waiting at anchor. In this hour, before the work of the day begins, the cold breath of the North Atlantic feels less like a threat, and more like a reminder that life here is not lived apart from nature, but within it, shaped by forces far greater than any single person. The sea will not bend to the will of man, but it will sometimes meet him halfway, and that is enough. It is from this place, this meeting of land and water, this edge where survival is balanced between risk and reward, that the story of the fisherman truly begins. In the small village nearby, the first stirrings of life are beginning, and the day's work waits quietly by the shore. From the damp stones of the shoreline, the path that leads inland rises gently, curving around patches of coarse grass and low, wind-bent shrubs that cling stubbornly to the shallow soil. The sea remains always in earshot behind you, its steady breathing, a constant reminder that no matter how far you walk, it is never far away. The morning air carries with it the mingled scents of salt and wood smoke, the latter drifting from chimneys scattered along the slope ahead, marking the presence of a village that seems almost a natural outgrowth of the land itself, as if it had always been there, quietly enduring. The houses here are low and sturdy, built not to impress, but to withstand the wind that sweeps in unrelentingly from the water. Their walls are made of stone and turf, layers of earth and grass laid thick to insulate against the cold. In summer these roofs blend into the hillsides, green upon green, while in winter they hunch beneath a blanket of snow, becoming almost indistinguishable from the land around them. The windows are small, letting in only what light is necessary, for heat is more precious than brightness. A narrow stream, its water clear and quick, runs down from the hills, splitting into channels that twist between the houses before emptying into the sea. The heart of the village is not marked by any great square or marketplace, but by a worn open space between the dwellings, a place where boats are pulled up from the water, and fishing gear is stored when not in use. Here the ground is trampled flat by countless footsteps, and the air is filled with the faint tang of drying fish. Wooden racks stand in neat rows, strung with fillets that sway gently in the breeze, their pale flesh glistening in the thin light. A pile of driftwood, gathered from the shore, waits to be split for cooking fires, for in this treeless land, every piece of timber is valued. Even in these early hours, the village stirs with quiet purpose. A woman steps out of her doorway, her woolen shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders, and walks toward the stream with a wooden bucket, her boots leaving dark impressions in the frost. A boy follows her at a distance, carrying a smaller pail, and he stops to watch a gull that has landed near one of the drying racks. The gull, sensing opportunity, hops closer, but the boy's sharp clap sends it wheeling into the air with a ruffle of wings. Somewhere nearby, the sound of a mallet striking wood rings out steadily, as a man repairs an oar, his movements unhurried but sure. The people here are not given to loud voices or unnecessary words. Their lives are lived in the steady rhythm of work, rest, and the turning of the seasons. The sea provides, but only for those who meet it with skill and preparation. And so there is always something to be done: nets to mend, lines to coil, boats to check for signs of wear. The fishermen work side by side, sharing tools and labor without ceremony, for cooperation is as vital to survival as the catch itself. In a place where the ocean can take a life as quickly as it gives one, trust between neighbors is built not in grand gestures, but in the quiet certainty that one will always be there for the other when needed. Children grow up in the midst of this work, their games often miniature versions of their parents' tasks. A group of them can be seen near the water's edge, fashioning small boats from scraps of wood, setting them afloat in the shallows, and laughing softly when the waves carry them back to shore. The older ones, nearing the age when they will join the fishing boats, watch the men with quiet attention, noting how they tie knots, how they read the water, how they handle the weight of a full net without straining the ropes. Their learning is not formal but constant, passed down in observation and practice, until the skills become as natural as breathing. Inside the homes, the air is warm and dim, the light coming from small oil lamps, whose flames flicker gently in the draught. The walls are hung with simple tools, cooking pots and lengths of dried fish that will serve as meals through the winter months. Families gather around low wooden tables, where bread made from barley flour is eaten with butter and fish, and mugs of warm broth help chase away the chill. The conversation is quiet, often consisting of short remarks about the weather, the state of the nets, or the timing of the next trip to sea. Stories are told in the evenings, when the work is done, and they are spoken in the slow, steady tone of people who know there is no need to hurry. At the edge of the village stands the small wooden church, its roof steep to shed the snow, its door worn smooth by the hands of many generations. Here the fishermen and their families gather on Sundays, their boots crunching in the frost, to hear words that remind them of their place in the world, humble before God, respectful before the sea. Prayers for safe voyages are offered quietly, and the blessing of the priest lingers in the mind long after the service has ended. Faith here is not a thing apart from daily life, but woven into it, a constant companion in the face of an unpredictable ocean. Looking down from the hillside above, the village seems small against the vastness of the landscape, a scatter of low roofs, a thin plume of smoke, the faint movement of figures along the shore. And yet, to those who live here, it is the center of the world, the place where life begins each morning and ends each night, where the sea's bounty is brought ashore, where the bonds between neighbors hold firm against the weight of winter storms. It is from this place that the fisherman steps out each day, his home a short walk from the beach, his tools stored where the salt air can reach them. He knows every path between the houses, every sound of the waves against the rocks, every change in the wind that might signal trouble or opportunity. The village is not merely where he lives, it is the anchor that holds him, the safe harbor to which he returns after facing the vast uncertainty of the open water. This morning, as the light grows a little stronger and the frost begins to loosen its grip on the grass, the fisherman can be seen walking toward the shore, his figure steady against the backdrop of the sea. Behind him, the village continues its quiet work, each person moving in the rhythm of their own task, yet all connected by the same unspoken understanding that the life of each depends in some way on the sea, and on the courage of those who go out to meet it. And so the fisherman reaches his small house, its door low and its walls thick, and steps inside to prepare for the day's voyage. The smell of drying fish lingers in the air, the quiet murmur of his family's voices filling the dim space. Soon he will gather the tools that have been readied the night before, check the lines and prepare to push out into the waiting waters. For now there is a brief moment of warmth and calm, a moment that will pass quickly, as all such moments do in a place where the tides set the pace of life. Inside the low doorway of the fisherman's house, the air changes instantly, the sharp salt wind replaced by the warm, steady breath of the hearth fire that has been tended since before dawn. The scent of wood smoke mingles with the faint aroma of fish broth simmering in a blackened iron pot, a fragrance so familiar that it hardly registers to those who live here, yet it speaks of comfort, of sustenance, of the small steady things that make survival possible, in a place where the cold and the sea press in on every side. The interior is dim, the only light coming from the flicker of the fire and the pale seep of day through the small deep-set window, its opening covered in oiled sheep's stomach to keep out the worst of the wind while still letting in a muted glow. The room is low-ceilinged, the beams thick and dark from years of smoke. Along the walls, built-in benches serve as seating during the day and as sleeping places at night, covered in layers of wool blankets and animal skins for warmth. Near the fire, a heavy wooden table bears the marks of countless meals and repairs, its surface scarred and worn smooth in places by generations of use. Hooks hang from the rafters, holding bundles of dried fish, coils of rope, and small pouches containing herbs gathered in the brief summer months, sage for fevers, angelica for strength, and a few precious strands of imported wool dyed with plant colors too rare to be found locally. The fisherman's wife moves with quiet efficiency, ladling steaming broth into wooden bowls, her hands practiced in the simple necessary motions of the morning. She wears a thick wool dress, the hem darkened by years of work, and an apron that carries the faint marks of flour, fish scales, and the constant handling of food. Her hair is bound and covered with a plain linen kerchief, for the cold makes loose hair a nuisance, and practicality is always placed before vanity here. She speaks little, but when she does, it is with the calm authority of one who manages both home and family while the men are at sea. Near the table, two children sit, the elder a boy of perhaps 11 years, already showing the lean strength that will one day carry him to the fishing boats. The younger a girl, her cheeks rosy from the warmth of the fire. The boy eats quickly, his eyes drifting often toward the fishing gear stacked neatly near the door, a silent yearning to be out on the water rather than kept ashore to gather driftwood or feed the small flock of sheep. The girl, still small enough to be shielded from the harder work, lingers over her meal, dipping her bread into the broth, and listening quietly as her father speaks in a low voice to her mother. The fisherman himself sits at the far side of the table, his shoulders broad beneath a heavy wool tunic, his hands large and roughened from years of work with rope, oar, and net. His hair, dark but threaded with grey, falls to his shoulders, and his beard is kept short for practicality, though flecked with salt from the sea air. He eats without haste, chewing slowly, his eyes fixed for a moment on the window, where the light outside is growing stronger, though still soft and pale. He speaks little during the meal, for the work ahead occupies his thoughts, the readiness of the gear, the state of the tides, the signs in the sky that might hint at the day's weather. When the bowls are emptied and set aside, the fisherman rises and begins to check his tools once more, though he had inspected them the night before. A length of line is drawn through his fingers, each knot examined, each fray tested to see if it will hold. The hooks, some fashioned from bent iron, others from shaped bone, are laid out in a careful row, their points sharp enough to pierce with ease. The small hand axe, used for splitting driftwood and occasionally for repairs at sea, is checked for a secure handle. The oars are leaned against the wall, their surfaces smooth from years of use, the grain of the wood polished by salt and sweat. The children watch this preparation in silence, the boy especially attentive, his eyes tracking each motion as if committing them to memory. He knows that in a few short years, he will be the one holding those oars, the one reading the sea's shifting face, the one whose skill and caution will mean the difference between returning home and being claimed by the water. In this house, as in every fisherman's home, the passing down of knowledge is not done in grand lessons, but in the small daily repetition of work, the tying of knots, the folding of nets, the way a line is coiled so it will not tangle when thrown. The fisherman's wife hands him a small leather pouch, its drawstring tied tight, containing a bit of bread and dried fish for the hours he will spend at sea. It is a simple meal, but one meant to sustain rather than please. She also places into his hand a small wooden token, carved with a cross, not an object of superstition in her eyes, but of faith, a reminder that God's hand lies over the sea as surely as it does over the land. The fisherman nods, tucking the token into the pouch, for he knows as well as she that skill alone is not always enough to ensure a safe return. Before leaving, he takes a moment to stand near the fire, letting its warmth sink into him. For once outside, the cold will press in and not release him until he steps through this doorway again. The children step forward to embrace him, the girl wrapping her small arms around his waist, the boy offering a firm grip of the hand, as if already practicing the way men greet one another. The wife meets his eyes for a long moment, no words exchanged, only the quiet understanding that comes from years of shared life in a place where each parting for the sea could, in the wrong conditions, be the last. Then he steps toward the door, ducking beneath the low lintel, the cold air rushing in to fill the space behind him. Outside, the light has grown stronger, though the sun still sits low in the sky, casting long shadows across the frost-touched grass. The path to the shore lies open before him, leading down past the other turf houses, where a few neighbors are also emerging, similarly dressed in heavy wool, their own gear slung over their shoulders. They nod in passing, their greetings quiet but genuine, for they will share the same waters in a short while. Behind him, the small house settles back into its morning rhythm. His wife clears the table and sets about the day's tasks, spinning wool, tending the fire, preparing food for when the fishermen return. The children will leave soon for their own duties, the boy to help gather driftwood along the beach, the girl to assist her mother. Life inside this home, as in all the homes of the village, flows in its own current, steady and constant, while the men are away on the uncertain water. The fisherman does not look back as he walks down toward the shore, for the house will still be there when he returns, the hearth still burning, the quiet voices still speaking softly in the dim light. Instead, his eyes are fixed ahead, on the place where the land meets the sea, where his small boat waits, pulled up above the tide line. Soon the day's work will begin in earnest, but for now, there is the brief, cold walk between the warmth of home and the vast waiting waters that will decide what this day will bring. The path to the shore is well worn, a pale line pressed into the frost-hardened ground by countless footsteps over the years, winding gently between the turf-roofed houses before opening onto the narrow strip of beach that serves as the village's harbour. The sea lies before it, calm for the moment, though never still, its slow, restless movement catching what little light the morning sky offers. The air here carries the sharper bite of the open water, a cold that slides through wool and fur and settles into the skin like something alive. The fisherman breathes it in deeply, the familiar sting clearing his mind, sharpening his senses for the work ahead. His boat rests just above the tide line, pulled onto the pebbled shore during the night, to keep it safe from the pull of the waves. It is small by the standards of distant ports, yet large enough to carry 3 or 4 men and the day's catch, built with care from scarce timber that may have drifted to shore or been brought at great cost from elsewhere. Its planks are darkened by years of salt and spray, the grain of the wood worn smooth by the rubbing of nets and the weight of the sea. Beside it, coiled lines rest neatly on the ground, each one mended and checked the night before, for out on the water, a frayed rope can mean the loss of a catch, or worse. Other fishermen are already here, their forms moving steadily through the pale light as they prepare their own boats. A low murmur of voices carries on the wind, not loud enough to disturb the quiet, but enough to remind each man that he does not face the sea alone. Greetings are brief, often no more than a nod or a short word, for there is work to be done and daylight, such as it is in these latitudes, is precious. The sea allows no lingering, its mood can shift with little warning, and those who fish these waters have learned to take advantage of every calm hour it offers. The fisherman walks to his boat and begins to ready it for launch, his hands moving in practiced motions that need no thought. The nets are placed carefully within reach, the lines coiled loosely so they will run smooth when cast. A small wooden box containing spare hooks and weights is tucked beneath the bench, alongside the leather pouch his wife gave him, holding the day's simple meal. The oars are checked for any looseness in the handles, the wood cool and solid beneath his fingers. The steady sound of preparation, the scrape of boots on pebble, the creak of wood as boats shift under the touch of the men, blends with the deep, constant murmur of the sea, forming the rhythm of the morning. One by one, the other men finish their tasks and turn their boats toward the water, their shoulders set against the cold wind as they push the vessels across the damp pebbles until the waves lift them clear. The fisherman joins them, his boots sinking slightly into the wet sand as he braces and shoves, the weight of the boat yielding slowly to the sea's pull. The first touch of water around his ankles is icy, but he does not flinch. This is a familiar sensation, one he has felt countless times before. As the boat begins to float, he climbs aboard with a practiced step, taking his place near the oars while one of his companions settles at the bow. For a moment the boat drifts just beyond the reach of the surf, rocking gently in the small swells. The fisherman's hands close around the worn handles of the oars, and he begins to row, the motion smooth and unhurried, each stroke dipping the blade deep into the water and pulling it back with steady force. The cold air burns in his lungs at first, but soon his body warms with the rhythm of the work. The shore begins to recede, the turf-roofed houses shrinking against the dark hills, the figures of those left behind growing smaller until they are only faint shapes against the pale light. As they move farther from land, the sounds of the village fade, replaced by the shifting song of the sea. The oars dip and rise, the wooden hull creaks softly, and the waves slap gently against the sides, each sound distinct yet blending into the steady music of the morning. Overhead, a few gulls follow, their cries sharp and brief, before they wheel away toward the distant cliffs. The sky is a patchwork of muted greys, with the occasional break in the clouds where a faint brightness shows, hinting at the sun's slow climb. The water deepens, its color darkening from pale green to a colder, heavier shade, the surface rippling with currents that move unseen beneath. The fisherman's eyes scan the horizon, noting the low, blurred outline of distant headlands, the direction of the wind, and the subtle patterns in the waves that might indicate where the fish are running. His companions row in time with him, their breaths forming pale clouds in the cold air, their focus turned toward the work ahead. There is little conversation, for words are unnecessary now. The sea demands attention, and the men give it willingly. The rhythm of departure is a thing learned over years, a careful balance between speed and caution. Too slow, and the day's best hours might be lost before the nets are even cast. Too fast, and the boat might strain against the currents or meet the chop of the open water unprepared. The fisherman's strokes are measured, his pace steady, the muscles in his shoulders working in harmony with the gentle rise and fall of the boat. He knows these waters well, but he also knows that familiarity is no shield against danger. Respect for the sea is the first rule, and the last. As they pass beyond the shelter of the bay, the open Atlantic greets them with a colder wind, carrying with it the scent of salt and something sharper, the promise of deeper water. The waves here are larger, rolling in long, slow swells that lift the boat and set it down again, as though the sea itself is breathing beneath them. The fisherman glances toward the horizon once more, searching for the faint signs that only experience can read, the movement of seabirds gathering in one place, the way the surface changes where currents meet, the shimmer that hints at life moving below. In this moment, the land behind them seems distant, though it has been only minutes since they left the shore. The houses are gone from sight, hidden by the curve of the coastline, and only the faint rise of the hills remains as a reminder of where they came from. Ahead lies nothing but water and sky, stretching out until the two meet in a hazy, indistinct line. The fisherman's world has narrowed to the boat, the oars, and the sea that holds them. The early morning departure is not a moment of excitement or fear, but of quiet readiness. It is the crossing from one world into another, from the solid certainty of the land to the shifting, unpredictable realm of the water. The fisherman knows that in the hours ahead, the sea will test his patience, his skill, and perhaps his resolve, as it always does. But for now, there is only the steady pull of the oars, the cold breath of the wind, and the faint rhythmic slap of water against the hull as they move toward the deeper waters where the day's work will begin. As the small boat rides the gentle rise and fall of the swells, the fisherman shifts his weight and reaches down to check the gear that has been stowed carefully within arm's reach. The tools of his craft are arranged in a way that wastes neither space nor motion. Each object here is simple in form, yet shaped by long years of refinement and necessity. For in this world there is little room for ornament, and none for waste. Every tool must serve its purpose well, because here at sea there is no room for the luxury of failure. The fishing lines are coiled neatly, each one made from twisted fibers of hemp or other plant matter, strong enough to bear the strain of a struggling cod, yet supple enough to work smoothly when cast into the water. The hemp is rough beneath the fingers, but softened slightly by long use, and the salt that has seeped into its strands over many voyages. The knots are tied in the practiced style handed down from father to son, each loop and twist shaped not for beauty, but for strength, designed to hold fast even when wet and pulled tight by the weight of a catch. Beside the lines rest the hooks, some of them forged from slender rods of iron, their curves hammered and filed into a sharp point by the village smith. Others shaped from strong animal bone, polished smooth but left with enough edge to pierce the tough mouth of a fish. They are small, each one fitting easily in the palm, yet there is a certain weight to them, the kind that comes from knowing that these unassuming bits of metal and bone stand between hunger and sustenance for the family waiting ashore. The hooks are tied to the lines with knots as familiar to the fisherman's hands as the motion of rowing, each one tested with a sharp tug before being set aside for use. A small wooden box sits at the fisherman's feet, its lid fastened with a simple leather strap. Inside are spare weights, rounded stones or bits of metal, each with a small hole drilled through for fastening to a line, and extra lengths of cord, in case something must be mended at sea. There is also a small knife, its blade worn thin from years of sharpening, the handle darkened by the grip of countless hands. It serves for cutting lines, cleaning fish, or carving a needed piece of wood, and though its form is plain, it is kept with the care given to something irreplaceable. The nets, folded and stored in the center of the boat, are made of hand-twisted fibers, each knot tied by patient fingers over long winter nights. They carry the faint scent of the sea even when dry, and their texture is rough but strong. Here and there patches show where they have been mended, the newer fibers lighter in color than the old, but every repair is tight and sure, for a net that fails can lose not only the catch but hours of labor. The floats, made from carved wood or inflated animal bladders, are tied securely along the edges, their role to keep the net suspended in the water, forming a barrier that the fish will swim into without realizing the trap they have entered. There is an oar for each man aboard, the blades broad and shaped to catch the water with maximum efficiency. Their surface is polished by the rhythm of work, but nicked in places by years of hard use. The handles fit easily into calloused hands, for they have been gripped in the same way day after day, season after season, their balance and weight as familiar to the fisherman as the feel of his own limbs. Between the benches, a small hand axe rests in reach, its head well honed, useful for splitting driftwood for a fire on shore, or cutting through a rope in an emergency. Every object here has been chosen, maintained, and carried with care, for each one is a silent partner in the day's work. There is no single piece of equipment that guarantees success, but together they form the means by which the fisherman meets the sea on as equal terms as he can hope for. It is a relationship built on trust. Trust that the oars will hold, the lines will not fray, the knots will not slip, and the boat will remain sound even when the waves rise higher than expected. The fisherman runs his hands over the nets one final time, his fingertips brushing against the fibers as if in silent conversation. He feels for any roughness, any weakness that might need mending, but finds none. Satisfied, he sets the nets back in their place and looks toward his companions. One is checking the hooks, laying them out on a small cloth before fastening them to the lines, his eyes scanning each one for any dullness that might make it less effective. Another man is coiling a length of rope, looping it carefully so that it will play out smoothly when needed. There is no wasted motion here, no hurry, but neither is there delay. Each movement is steady, deliberate, and part of a pattern learned over years. These tools are not luxuries, not conveniences. They are lifelines, as vital as the air in the fisherman's lungs or the strength in his arms. Without them, there is no catch, and without the catch, there is no survival through the long winter months when the sea is too fierce to fish and the land offers little beyond what has been stored. The fisherman knows this as well as he knows the creak of his boat or the sound of the wind shifting, and so he treats each object with respect, repairing, replacing, and preserving them as best he can. When everything has been checked and found ready, the fisherman sets the oars again in their locks, glancing toward the horizon where the sea stretches out into a low, rolling distance. Somewhere beneath that surface, the cod and haddock move in slow schools, their presence betrayed only by the patterns in the water, the flight of birds above, or the sudden ripple where one breaks the surface. The tools are ready, the men are ready, and the sea, for now, seems willing to receive them. He knows, as they all do, that readiness is no guarantee. A sudden change in the wind, an unexpected current, or the appearance of dark clouds on the horizon can turn a promising day into one of hardship and danger. But he also knows that to leave shore without ensuring that every hook is sharp, every knot secure, and every oar sound is to invite misfortune before the first line is cast. And so, with the quiet satisfaction of one who has prepared as well as he can, he places his hands once more on the worn oar handles and begins to row, the boat gliding toward the deeper water where the day's true work will begin. The oars dip into the water with a quiet, deliberate rhythm, the blades sliding beneath the surface, and then lifting free in a steady, unhurried cycle, sending small ripples outward that fade almost as soon as they appear. The boat moves forward in smooth, patient strokes, each pull matched by the men seated along its benches, their movements so well practiced that they seem less like individuals and more like parts of a single steady force. The cold air moves across their faces, carrying with it the taste of salt and the faint scent of seaweed rising from the shallows they are leaving behind. The shoreline drifts slowly backward, the dark stones of the beach giving way to the blurred line where land and sea meet. The turf-roofed houses, the wooden racks strung with drying fish, and the thin thread of smoke rising from hearth fires all begin to fade into the soft haze of distance. The calls of gulls grow fainter, their voices blending into the deeper murmur of the water itself. The village will soon disappear from sight entirely, hidden by the low swell of the sea and the curve of the coastline, leaving only the horizon ahead. The water beneath the boat changes as they row. The pale, sandy green of the near shore deepens into a darker, cooler shade, the bottom no longer visible, replaced by a smooth, shifting surface that hides the slow movements of currents below. The boat rocks gently in the long, rolling swells, rising and falling in a rhythm older than the village itself, a rhythm that shapes the lives of everyone who depends on the sea. The men feel it through the soles of their boots and the weight in their arms, a constant reminder that the water beneath them is alive, always moving, always changing. Each stroke of the oar is met with the resistance of the sea, a steady, measured opposition that the fishermen push against without complaint. They do not row as if to conquer the water, but as if to move with it, finding the balance that allows them to travel far without exhausting themselves too quickly. This is not a sprint, it is a measured journey into a place where patience is as important as strength. The rhythm is maintained without the need for words, the men breathing in time with the oars, the boat answering each movement with its own soft creak of wood and rope. The sound of rowing here is different from that near the shore. There, the oars stir the shallows with a faint splash, mingled with the sound of pebbles shifting in the wash of the tide. Here, the water is deeper, heavier, and the dip of the blades is met with a muted, almost hollow note, followed by the soft hiss of droplets falling back into the sea. The air itself feels larger, the space around them more open, as the narrow frame of the bay falls away and the horizon stretches unbroken in every direction. The fisherman glances toward the sky as he rows, noting the patterns in the clouds, thin, high streaks to the west, heavier banks far to the north. The wind is steady for now, neither too strong nor too still, carrying them gently forward without forcing them to fight against it. He reads the signs with the quiet focus of one who knows that the sea will speak if you listen carefully enough, not in words, but in the tilt of a wave, the movement of a bird, the shift of light on the water. As they move farther out, the swell grows more pronounced, each rise lifting the boat higher, each fall revealing the horizon in a broad, slow sweep. In the troughs, the world feels smaller, enclosed by the walls of water on either side. On the crests, it opens wide again, the distant line of the sea meeting the pale grey sky in a seamless curve. There is a steady pulse to it, a reminder that the sea is not a flat surface to be crossed, but a vast breathing expanse that must be moved through with care and respect. The oarsmen keep their pace steady, conserving their strength for the hours of work ahead. Rowing is not merely a matter of force, it is a conversation with the water, a constant adjustment to the way the waves lift and shift beneath the hull. A stroke that is too heavy in the wrong moment can jar the rhythm, sending a shiver through the boat and wearing down the men more quickly than they realize. And so they move in quiet harmony, letting the sea set the tempo, meeting its resistance with an equal and measured response. Occasionally a bird passes overhead, a black guillemot skimming low over the waves, a kittiwake circling before disappearing toward the cliffs. These are not idle sightings. Each bird has its own habits, its own relationship with the fish below, and the fishermen mark their presence as part of the slow gathering of signs that will tell them where to cast their nets. A cluster of birds diving repeatedly into the same patch of water might mean that a shoal of fish is moving beneath the surface, a detail worth remembering when the time comes to choose a spot. The air grows colder as they move farther from shore, the wind no longer softened by the land behind them. The fisherman feels it against the side of his face, slipping beneath the edges of his woolen hood, and pulls his cloak tighter across his chest. It is not an unpleasant cold, not yet, but it is the kind that demands attention, the kind that reminds a man that comfort is something left behind when you step into the boat. Out here, the cold is part of the work, something to endure as you would the pull of the oars or the weight of the nets. The boat moves steadily onward, the land now only a low smudge behind them, the open waters ahead, stretching far beyond sight. The fisherman shifts his grip slightly, the worn handles of the oars fitting more comfortably into his palms, and keeps his eyes moving between the horizon, the clouds and the water at his side. There is no rush. The sea rewards patience, and the fish they seek will not be found by those who hurry past them without thought. Rowing into the open waters is not merely a journey from one place to another, it is a passage from the familiar to the unknown, from the solid certainty of the shore to the shifting uncertainty of the sea. Each stroke carries the boat deeper into that realm, where the only boundaries are those set by the weather, the tides and the endurance of the men themselves. The fisherman knows this crossing well, but he never takes it for granted. The sea does not remember those who came before, and it owes nothing to those who come now. And so the oars rise and fall, the boat slides forward over the swells, and the horizon draws them on toward the deeper places where the day's true labor will begin. The tools are ready, the men are steady, and the sea, for this brief and precious moment, seems willing to let them pass. The boat glides onward, the steady pull of the oars keeping it in motion, until the land behind them has faded so completely into the mist that it might never have existed at all. Now there is nothing in any direction but water and sky, each as pale and subdued as the other, the horizon a thin and uncertain line where one seems to dissolve into the other. The light is soft here, filtered through the unbroken blanket of cloud that hangs low over the sea, so that no shadow falls, no edge stands sharp. It is a world reduced to a palette of greys, greens and muted silvers, all of them shifting with the rise and fall of the swell. The sea beneath them is not rough, yet neither is it still. It moves in slow, patient undulations like the breathing of some vast creature slumbering beneath the surface. The swell lifts the boat with a long, gentle motion, then lowers it again into the trough, so that each man's view alternates between the sky above and the temporary walls of water on either side. The motion is constant, unending, a reminder that here, far from the shelter of the bay, they are in the true realm of the North Atlantic, where the scale of things is vast and the measure of a man feels small. The air is colder here, and cleaner too, carrying no scent of land, only the deep salt of the ocean, and the faint trace of kelp drifting somewhere far below. It tastes sharper, as if each breath carries with it the memory of the storms that sweep across these waters in other seasons. The wind brushes against their faces in small shifting currents, never strong enough to push them off course, but always present, always whispering across the open space between sky and sea. The horizon remains empty, no other boats, no distant sails, no sign of another human presence marks the expanse around them. There is only the occasional bird, a puffin skimming low over the waves before disappearing into the mist, or a solitary gannet circling high overhead. its pale body stark against the darker sky. Even these are rare this far out, and their appearances are fleeting, small movements against a canvas too wide to hold them for long. The fisherman rests his oars for a moment, letting the boat drift in the swell. The sound changes instantly, the rhythmic dip and pull of the blades replaced by the softer lap of water against the hull, the creak of the wooden planks as they shift gently with the movement beneath. The sea's voice here is quieter, less insistent than near the shore, but there is an underlying weight to it, a sense of vastness that does not need to raise its tone to be felt. It is in the way the water stretches in every direction without end, in the knowledge that beneath this small boat lies a depth that no man could swim and return from. Out here, the sky itself feels larger, the clouds seeming to move more slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the stillness. Patches of lighter grey drift across the expanse, hinting at the unseen sun behind them, though its warmth cannot reach this far. The fisherman watches these subtle shifts, noting where the light touches the water and where it leaves it dull and shadowed. Such patterns can mean many things: changes in the wind, the movement of currents, or the presence of fish near the surface. The signs are delicate, easy to miss if the eye is not trained, but for those who have spent their lives on these waters, they are as clear as footprints in snow. The men in the boat speak little. Conversation here feels out of place, as though words would be swallowed by the vastness before they could carry any meaning. Instead, they work with quiet gestures, a nod to indicate a change in rowing pace, a glance toward a patch of water that might hold promise, a shift in position to balance the boat against the swell. Their silence is not the silence of strangers, but the deep, easy quiet of those who share an understanding beyond speech. The fisherman's gaze moves from the horizon to the water itself. Beneath the muted surface, the sea is alive with movement unseen, great shoals of cod, moving slowly through the cold depths, following currents and the migrations of smaller fish. He cannot see them, not directly, but he knows they are there, the ocean's hidden wealth, the reason he and his companions are out here in this emptiness. The task is to find them, to read the subtle hints the sea offers, and to meet them in the right place at the right time. The horizon remains unchanged, as the minutes stretch into longer spans of quiet drifting. There is no rush. Fishing in these waters has never been a matter of speed, but of patience. To hurry is to risk passing over what you seek, to waste energy fighting the sea rather than working with it. The fisherman waits, his eyes always scanning, watching the flight of a lone bird, the way the surface dimples in one patch but not another, the faint shadow of something moving just beneath the swell. Far in the distance, where the sky meets the water, the line blurs further, as if the world there is not fully formed. It is a place he will not reach today, nor on any day, for the horizon is always just as far ahead as it was when you began. And yet, it draws the eyes as surely as the shore draws them home. There is a quiet comfort in its constancy, in knowing that no matter how far you row, the meeting of sea and sky will always be there to greet you. The endless grey horizon has its own kind of weight, not the heavy weight of danger, though that is always present in these waters, but the lighter, more enduring weight of time itself. Days, months, years pass over this expanse, and still it remains the same, its colours shifting with the seasons, but its shape unchanging. The fisherman has known it all his life, as his father and grandfather did before him, and in it there is a sense of belonging, as though the sea has shaped him just as much as he has shaped his nets and lines. A faint movement catches his eye, a small disturbance in the water, a ripple where none should be, followed by the brief flash of something pale beneath the surface. One of his companions sees it too, and their eyes meet in silent agreement. This is what they have been waiting for. The endless horizon remains, but their attention narrows now, drawn to a single patch of sea in the vastness, a place where the stillness hides a gathering of life. The oars are taken up again, the slow, measured strokes carrying the boat toward that spot. The horizon fades from thought, replaced by the nearness of the work ahead. Yet it is always there, all around them, a quiet boundary to the world, a reminder that no matter how small their boat, no matter how focused their task, they are part of something far greater and far older than themselves. The boat drifts to a gentle stop, the oars resting quietly inside the hull, their blades trailing faint ripples in the water before lying still. The swell continues its slow, steady lifting and lowering of the vessel, the motion so constant that it feels almost like the breathing of the sea itself. Here in this chosen spot, there is no need for haste. The work ahead is not measured in moments, but in long unbroken stretches of time, the kind that pass almost unnoticed except for the gradual change in the light or the shifting position of the clouds overhead. The fisherman begins by taking up the nearest line, its coil resting neatly at his feet. He checks the hook at its end, running a thumb along the curve to be certain it is sharp, then selects a strip of bait from a small wooden box, the flesh of a smaller fish, salted to preserve it, its scent enough to draw the larger catch from the depths. The hook is baited with practiced ease, the motion so familiar that it is done without conscious thought. The line is then lowered into the water, the weight at its end carrying it down through the green depths, until it disappears entirely, swallowed by the sea. There is no sound now, but the small rhythmic slap of water against the hull, and the faint creak of the boat's wooden frame. The men sit in silence, each holding a line loosely between his fingers, feeling for the faintest tug that might signal interest below. Their eyes rest not on one another, but on the water's surface, their minds turned inward to the quiet waiting that is as much a part of fishing as the casting of nets or the pull of the oars. Patience here is not passive. It is a skill, as necessary as strength or seamanship. The fisherman must read the subtle language of the line, the faint shift that means a fish has brushed against the bait, the sharper tug that might come from a curious bite, the steady pull that signals the moment to strike. Too soon, and the hook will come up empty. Too late, and the fish will free itself, leaving only a bare line to be lowered again. The minutes stretch, unhurried, marked only by the slow rhythm of the swell and the occasional passing of a bird overhead. The cold seeps gradually into fingers and toes, but it is the kind of discomfort that is accepted as part of the work, something to be endured without complaint. The fisherman shifts his weight slightly, adjusting the line in his hands, his eyes never leaving the water. He has learned, over years, to let the stillness of the moment settle over him, to match his own patience to that of the sea. At last, there is a change, so small it might be missed by someone less practiced. The line in his hand gives a faint, almost hesitant twitch. He waits, resisting the urge to pull too soon. Another twitch comes, stronger this time, followed by a steady, deliberate pull. In a single smooth motion, he draws the line upward, the resistance growing as the weight of the catch fights against him. The line comes up hand over hand, the wet hemp rough against his palms, until the pale, glinting shape of a fish breaks the surface, twisting in protest against the air. It is a good size, its silver scales catching what little light filters through the clouds. The fisherman lifts it into the boat with care, unhooking it quickly to minimize the struggle, then sets it into a wooden trough where it flutters for a moment before lying still. Without pause, he checks the hook, replaces the bait, and lowers the line again into the waiting water. This is the rhythm of the catch, not a rush, but a steady, repeated motion, each one a thread in the long weave of the day's work. The other men have their own catches, the thud of fish landing in the troughs punctuating the otherwise quiet air. Sometimes the lines come up empty, the bait stripped away without a bite. Sometimes they bring in fish too small to keep, which are returned to the water without hesitation. There is no disappointment in these moments, only the calm acceptance that the sea gives what it will when it will. Hours pass in this way, the light shifting slowly overhead. The sky remains a uniform grey, the horizon distant and unchanging, but within the boat, small signs mark the passage of time. The growing weight of the catch, the deepening ache in the men's shoulders and hands, the slow accumulation of fatigue that settles in the body after long stillness broken by bursts of effort. The fisherman takes a brief moment to eat, pulling the small leather pouch from beneath the bench and breaking off a piece of bread. He chews slowly, watching the line for any movement, the taste of the salted fish he eats mingling with the salt of the air itself. There is no sense in setting the line aside, for a bite can come at any moment, and to be ready is as much a part of patience as the waiting itself. Occasionally, the water's surface changes, a sudden ripple where the swell had been smooth, the brief flash of a dorsal fin far off, or the swirl of fish moving closer to the surface. Each sign is noted, though not all will lead to a catch. The fisherman's eyes move constantly, scanning not just the water immediately around the boat, but the broader patterns of sea and sky, looking for the hints that will guide the next cast, the next shift in position. The catch comes slowly, as it always does. There are no sudden hauls here, no overflowing nets pulled in at once, only the steady gathering of fish one by one, each taken with care and attention. The work is repetitive, but it is in that repetition that the fisherman finds his rhythm, the same rhythm that has shaped his life and the lives of those before him. Out here, patience is not just a virtue, it is the means by which the sea is met on its own terms. By the time the trough holds a respectable weight of fish, the men know the day's work is moving toward its midpoint. There is still more to do, still more to take if the sea will allow it, but the pressure of the morning has eased. The first hunger has been met, and now they can settle deeper into the slow pull and release. The quiet watchfulness, the unbroken patience that defines their craft. The fisherman lowers his line again, feeling it slip through his fingers into the cold depths. The sea accepts it without sound, the horizon still and unchanged around them. Somewhere below, the fish move unseen, their lives as constant and necessary as his own. He waits for the next tug, the next quiet exchange between man and water, knowing that it will come in its own time, and that when it does, he will be ready. The fisherman lowers his line once more into the deep green-grey water, the weight carrying it down until the surface is smooth again, the bait hidden far below. The rhythm of the morning has settled in, the boat drifting gently in the swell, the men quietly attending their lines, the air filled only with the sounds of water, wood, and the occasional wing beat of a passing gull. But even as the work continues, there is an awareness in each man, a quiet listening not only to the fish beneath them, but to the sea itself. For out here the ocean can change its mind without warning. It is not always the sudden obvious signs that mark danger. A storm may announce itself with a dark wall of cloud rolling in from the horizon, or a wind that rises sharp and fast. But more often the first hints are subtle, a change in the taste of the air, a shift in the swell's direction, a faint deepening of the water's color as currents turn. The fisherman has learned to watch for these things, to let his senses gather them without forcing meaning too quickly. The sea, like any old and unpredictable companion, prefers to speak in hints rather than clear words. Now, as the morning wears on, there is such a hint. The swell, which has been slow and even since they left the shelter of the bay, grows just slightly steeper, the crests sharper, though the wind itself has not yet strengthened. It is a small thing, the kind of change an untrained eye might overlook, but the fisherman notes it silently, his hand pausing on the line for a moment as he glances toward the horizon. There, the greys of sky and water still meet without interruption, but far to the north, the clouds are gathering more thickly, their undersides darkened by shadows. The morning light cannot pierce. The air feels different too, cooler, sharper, carrying a faint metallic edge that often comes before the wind begins to shift. It brushes against his cheek in small, uneven gusts rather than the steady breath of earlier, and he knows from experience that the surface currents will already be adjusting beneath them, invisible but strong. The boat responds in small ways, a quicker tilt to one side, a sharper slap of water against the bow, signs that the sea's mood is moving towards something less welcoming. The men do not speak of it yet. There is no need. Each has seen the same gathering signs, each feels the same unease beneath the work of their hands. They continue to fish, but their glances toward the horizon grow more frequent, their movements just a little quicker between casts. The sea is generous at times, but it is never without its price, and those who take from it must always be ready to pay in readiness, in respect, in the willingness to leave before they have taken all they might wish. The fisherman recalls other days when such changes came, days when a promising morning was swallowed by sudden weather, when wind and wave rose so swiftly that the return to shore became a battle against the very element that had fed them. He remembers the creak of the oars straining in their locks, the cold spray stinging his face, The way the bow would crash into the oncoming swells and send shudders through the whole frame of the boat. Those memories are not told as stories of heroism in the village. They are told as quiet warnings, lessons in how quickly the sea can remind a man of his smallness. Beneath the surface, the hidden dangers are no less real. Shifting currents can carry a boat off course before the men realize they are drifting. Large fish or unseen obstacles can tangle a line so badly that it must be cut, wasting not only the bait but precious time. In the colder months, ice can form on the water's surface or on the boat itself, adding weight that threatens balance and speed. And though rare, there are stories, half believed, half dismissed, of great creatures moving far below, their presence marked only by a sudden stillness in the smaller fish, a shadow that passes beneath the hull before fading into the depths again. Today, there is no such shadow, but there is the constant, quiet reminder that they are guests here, and that the sea's hospitality is never guaranteed for long. The fisherman shifts his position slightly, his boots braced against the damp planks, and feels the boat lift a little higher on the swell than it did an hour ago. It is not yet dangerous, but it is enough to remind him that they must measure their time carefully if they wish to return with their catch, and with themselves, intact. A glance to the south shows the faintest line of the coastline, blurred now by distance and mist. It is still there, still reachable, but it is a long pull of the oars away, and each minute spent here must be weighed against the effort it will take to reach it should the sea turn rougher. He meets the eyes of one of his companions, and in that quiet exchange there is agreement. They will not linger too long. The catch is good enough for the day already, and there is no sense in trading safety for a few more fish. Still, they work for a little while longer, watching both the lines in their hands and the clouds above. The bites come steadily, and each fish brought aboard is a small victory. Yet even in the satisfaction of the work there is a tension, the awareness that time is not on their side now. The sea has shifted its tone, and though it is not yet speaking in the full voice of a storm, it is no longer the calm, patient water they rode into this morning. The fisherman hauls in his line one final time, the silver body of the fish flashing briefly before it is brought aboard. He unhooks it quickly, lays it in the trough with the others, and begins to coil the line with care, making certain it will not tangle in the boat. Around him, the others do the same, their movements efficient but without panic, for speed here comes not from haste but from practiced order. The nets are checked and stowed, the spare gear secured, the oars readied for the journey home. Before they turn the boat toward shore, the fisherman takes one last look around the open water. The horizon is closer now, in feeling, as though the greyness has drawn in upon them, and the sea's surface carries a texture that speaks of wind moving across it farther out. He nods to himself, satisfied with the decision to leave now. The sea may yet hold its peace for another hour, or it may rise against them before they are halfway back. There is no predicting it with certainty, but by moving now, they keep the choice in their own hands for a little while longer. The oars dip once more into the water, and the boat begins to turn, its bow swinging toward the faint promise of land. Behind them, the fishing ground they chose fades into the vastness, as if it had never been a distinct place at all. Ahead lies the long pull toward the village, and with it the hope of reaching the safety of the shore before the hidden dangers they have sensed show themselves in full. The first pull of the oars feels different now. Not in weight exactly, for the sea is still gentle compared to its worst moods, but in purpose, in the quiet urgency that comes when men decide it is time to leave the fishing grounds behind. The boat shifts under the combined strength of the rowers, its bow turning toward the distant smudge of land that marks the Icelandic coast, barely visible in the pale haze that hangs over the horizon. The swell, which had been a slow and steady lift earlier in the day, now comes at a slightly sharper angle, so that each rise tilts the hull a little more before it settles again. It is not dangerous yet, but it is enough to remind them that they are moving through a place that can change quickly. The oars dip in and out of the water with a rhythm born of long practice, the blades slicing cleanly through the surface before pulling back against the weight of the sea. Droplets fall in small arcs, catching what light there is before vanishing again into the green depths. The men row in silence, their breathing measured, their eyes glancing from time to time toward the clouds that have thickened far to the north. The darkening edges of those clouds suggest the presence of wind that has not yet reached them but might well do so before the day is over. The fisherman feels the muscles in his shoulders and arms settle into the familiar ache that comes with long rowing. It is not unpleasant, more a reminder of the work done, the distance traveled. He leans into each stroke without haste, conserving his strength, for the pull back to shore will take time. The currents here are not always in a man's favor, and though the tide is not at its strongest, there are subtle forces moving beneath them, slow but constant, that must be worked against to keep the bow pointing toward home. Behind them the fishing grounds fade quickly, swallowed by the unmarked expanse of water. Out here there are no landmarks to track a journey, only the position of the sun behind the clouds, the angle of the swell, and the memory of where the land lies. The fisherman trusts these guides, not because they are infallible, but because they are the same guides his father and grandfather used before him, the same ones that have brought countless boats home through years of fishing. The wind shifts slightly, brushing against the side of the fisherman's face and carrying with it a cooler, sharper edge. It moves over the surface of the sea in faint ripples that differ from the swell beneath, a second layer of motion that changes the texture of the water. He notes the way it catches at the crest of each wave, pulling a few drops away into the air before letting them fall back again. The boat adjusts to this shift without conscious thought from its crew, each man altering the angle of his stroke just enough to keep their progress steady. There is comfort in the shared labor. The boat moves as one body, the rower's motions synchronized by long habit rather than instruction. When one man quickens his stroke slightly to match the swell, the others follow without needing to be told. When the sea lifts them higher, they brace instinctively, leaning into the oars with just enough extra strength to ride the descent smoothly. These are the kinds of adjustments that keep a boat moving efficiently over long distances, the quiet skill that comes from years of working together. The fisherman glances ahead again. The shore is still distant, its outline blurred by mist, but he can make out the faint, dark rise of the hills behind the village. Between them and that place lies open water, a space that will take hours to cross at their steady pace. He knows that the last part of the journey will feel the longest, the point where the land is in sight yet never seems to draw closer, but he also knows that there is no better pace than the one they hold now. To rush would be to tire too soon. To slow would be to risk meeting the wind at its strongest. Now and then, a bird passes overhead, its wings steady as it heads toward the shore. The fisherman takes note of their direction and height, for seabirds are more than decoration in the sky. They are signs. A greater number of them heading inland can mean that the weather over the open sea is about to worsen. The few he sees now are spaced widely apart, not in flocks, but the fact that they are flying landward lingers in his thoughts. The boat continues to rise and fall with the swell, each descent into a trough, briefly hiding the land from view before the next crest restores it. The sea has taken on a deeper color now, the green shading toward a colder blue-gray, as though the light itself has shifted in tone. Somewhere far to the west, beyond sight, the sky may be darker still, for the reflections here carry a shadow that does not come from the clouds directly overhead. The fisherman does not speak of it. There is no need to pass on a worry that cannot be acted upon, not yet. The hours stretch quietly, the only sounds those of oars in the water, the faint creak of wood, and the muted hiss of waves breaking in miniature against the hull. Fatigue settles into the legs and backs of the men, but it is the kind of fatigue that is familiar, expected. They have rowed these distances many times before, and they know how to carry themselves through it. The fisherman focuses on the rhythm, letting it carry his thoughts into the simple, steady place that long work often brings, a place where each motion is the same as the last, and time is marked only by the slow drawing nearer of the land. At last the shoreline grows clearer. The pale line of the beach is visible now, and above it the darker forms of the turf-roofed houses, the thin columns of smoke rising into the damp air. The sight brings no great outburst of relief. That is not the way of these men, but it is a quiet satisfaction, a small easing of the tension that has been present since they noticed the shift in the sea's mood. The wind has not risen sharply as it might have, but it has enough bite to remind them that they have chosen their moment well. The fisherman keeps his strokes steady until the waves grow shallower, the color of the water lightening to that pale green that marks the sandy bottom near the shore. Here the swell is smaller, gentler, though the tide's pull is felt more directly. The boat slows, not because the men have lessened their effort, but because the water itself grows thicker with sand and silt stirred up by the constant motion. Ahead, figures are visible on the beach, women, children, and a few older men who have remained ashore. They are watching the boats return, their shapes moving between the racks where fish are dried, and the piles of driftwood stacked for winter fuel. The sight is a welcome one, though it is met with the same steady expression as all else, for the fisherman knows that even a safe return is only part of the day's work. There is still the unloading, the cleaning, the salting of the catch, tasks that will carry the day well into the afternoon. The oars lift one last time from the water, their blades dripping, as the boat glides onto the shallows and rests gently against the pebbled shore. The journey back is done, and the land is beneath their feet again, solid and unyielding. The fisherman steps out, the cold water briefly flooding his boots, and feels the firm weight of the ground rise up to meet him. For all the hours spent at sea, it is always this moment, the first step onto land again, that carries its own quiet relief. The boat settles in the shallows with a low, satisfying scrape as the rounded stones beneath grind softly against the worn planks of the keel. The sound is familiar and reassuring, a sign that the long pull from the fishing grounds is truly at its end. The fisherman feels the water swirl around his boots as he steps over the side, the cold seeping instantly through the thick wool, biting at his ankles, but doing nothing to slow the steady way he moves toward the shore. Behind him, his companions are already lifting the oars from their locks, setting them carefully across the thwarts so they do not clatter or shift as the work of unloading begins. The air here is different from the open sea, still sharp with salt, but carrying with it the smells of the village, the tang of drying fish from the racks above the beach, the faint smoke drifting from hearth fires, and the earthy scent of turf and damp soil. The wind is gentler, softened by the curve of the bay and the low rise of the land, though it still carries a chill that works its way into the bones. If a man stands still too long, there is no standing still now. The moment the boat grounds, the work flows naturally into the next stage, each man moving with quiet purpose. Children are the first to reach the water's edge, their boots splashing in the shallows as they run to greet fathers, brothers, and uncles. Their voices carry lightly over the steady rush of waves, but they are not the wild shouts of idle play. There is curiosity here, a hunger to see what the sea has given this day. They peer into the boat as the men begin to lift the troughs, their eyes catching on the pale gleam of fish scales, the slow flex of a tail that still moves out of habit rather than life. On the higher part of the beach, women wait, shawls drawn tightly around their shoulders, their faces turned toward the returning boats. Some step forward to take smaller loads from the men as they come up from the water. Others stand ready to sort the catch. The village's older men, too frail to row but still strong enough for work on shore, wade in to help guide the boats into place, steadying them against the gentle push and pull of the tide. There is no ceremony here, no cheer, no applause, only the quiet shared satisfaction of a task completed as it should be. The fisherman lifts one end of a wooden trough, the other man at his side taking the opposite handle. Together they carry it up the slope of pebbles and damp sand to the place where the day's work will be laid out. The fish slide against each other inside, their scales cool and slick, the air around them already taking on that unmistakable smell, not unpleasant to those who live here, but simply part of life, a reminder of the source of their sustenance. The trough is set down near a flat stretch of ground where the catch will be cleaned and prepared. Other men follow, carrying their own shares from the boats, setting them in neat rows so that the sorting can begin. The work is done without haste, but without pause, for fresh fish must be tended quickly if it is to keep. Knives are drawn from sheaths, their edges sharp from careful sharpening the night before, and hands move with steady, precise motions born of years of repetition. The heads are removed, the bellies opened and cleaned, the offal set aside for use as bait, or to be returned to the sea. The women join in this work, some cutting, others rinsing the fish in buckets of cold seawater brought up from the tide. The younger children help in small ways, carrying empty buckets back to the water, gathering handfuls of coarse salt from the barrels, where it is kept dry under canvas. Each task, no matter how small, is part of the larger whole, and each pair of hands makes the work move more swiftly. Farther up the beach, the drying racks stand ready. They are simple wooden frames, sturdy enough to bear the weight of the fish that will be hung upon them. Strips are cut lengthwise from the cleaned bodies, the flesh pale and firm, and these are laid across the racks in careful rows. The wind that blows from the sea will do its work over the coming days, drawing the moisture away and leaving behind a food that can last through the months when the ocean cannot be trusted to give freely. All around, the sound of quiet labor fills the air, the scrape of knives on wood, the slap of fish laid on the racks, the low murmur of voices passing brief words about the quality of the catch or the work to be done later. There is no rush, for they have learned that haste often leads to waste. It is better to work at a steady pace, to make sure that every fish is cleaned properly, that every piece is salted or hung to dry before the light fades. The fisherman pauses for a moment, his knife resting in his hand, and glances back toward the sea. The boats are all ashore now, drawn up beyond the reach of the tide, their bows resting on the pebbles. The water beyond them shifts under a sky that is still heavy with cloud, the darker shapes to the north, holding steady but not yet pressing closer. The air is cooler than when they left in the morning, but the wind in the sheltered bay is light. For now the sea has allowed them this safe return, and that is enough. Turning back to the work, he takes up another fish, the motion of cleaning it as familiar as the motion of rowing. The blade moves smoothly, separating flesh from bone, setting aside each part for its use. There is a rhythm here too, different from the one at sea but just as steady, a land-bound echo of the pull and release of the oars. Around him, others move in that same rhythm, each aware of the work of the others, each part fitting naturally into the larger pattern. By the time the sun has shifted higher, though its light is still filtered through the grey veil of clouds, much of the catch has been cleaned and set to dry. The rest is stored in large wooden tubs layered with salt, to be kept for the days when no boats can go out. The beach, so quiet in the early morning, is now alive with movement, every part of it touched by the work of turning the sea's gift into something that will carry the village through the weeks ahead. When the last of the fish has been tended, the tools are cleaned and stored, the knives wiped and set back in their sheaths, the troughs rinsed in the tide and left to dry. The racks stand heavy with their burden, the pale strips of fish stirring gently in the breeze, their scent carrying inland to the houses where the rest of the day's tasks wait. The men straighten slowly, stretching backs stiffened by the hours of bending, their eyes turning briefly toward the horizon once more before they begin the short walk back to the village. The landing is over, but the day is not. There is always more to be done, nets to mend, gear to prepare, wood to split for the fires that will burn through the long night. Yet for now, the heart of the work is complete. The sea's offering safely ashore, and the beach returns to its quieter state, the sound of the waves once again the loudest voice here. With the boats drawn high above the tide line, and the last of the catch carried from the shore, the heart of the work shifts from gathering to keeping. In a place like this, where the winter sea can roar for weeks without pause and storms can hold the boats in place far longer than patience allows, the act of preservation is not an afterthought. It is the quiet anchor that holds life steady through the long months when the ocean cannot be trusted to give. The fish taken today, fresh and cold from the water, must be turned into food that will outlast the season, holding its worth until the time comes to eat it weeks or even months from now. The racks on the rise above the beach are already lined with their early burden, long strips of pale flesh that stir faintly in the breeze, their damp surfaces glinting in the dim light. These are for drying, a method as old as the fishing itself, requiring only wind, air, and time. The fisherman moves among them now, checking that each piece is laid flat, that no edge folds over itself to trap moisture, for even a small patch left damp can spoil an entire strip. The smell here is sharp and unmistakable, the clean scent of fresh fish mingling with the salt-laden air of the bay, a smell that has marked these villages for as long as they have stood. Beyond the drying racks, barrels wait, some already filled, others empty and open-mouthed, ready for the day's new catch. These are for the salted fish, a more certain safeguard than drying, though it requires a steady supply of the coarse white salt that must be traded for, or carefully stored from earlier seasons. The barrels themselves are heavy oak, bound with iron hoops, their interiors scrubbed clean and dry, so that no trace of old brine lingers to taint the new layers. The work of salting is deliberate and unhurried. A thick bed of salt is spread across the bottom of a barrel, the crystals catching the faint light in dull sparkles. Then comes the first layer of fish, laid neatly side by side, each one pressed firmly into place, so that no space is left for air to creep in. Another layer of salt follows, poured generously until the fish are hidden from sight. This process is repeated. Fish, salt, until the barrel is full, or the day's supply runs short. The topmost layer is always salt, pressed down with a wooden disc and weighted to keep everything firmly in place. The fisherman works with steady hands, the salt cool and dry beneath his fingers, the fish firm and slick in his grip. There is a satisfaction here that is different from the pull of a line, or the heft of a full net. The quiet assurance of knowing that the work done now will feed his family when the sea is locked in ice, and the winds howl against the turf walls of their home. Each barrel sealed is a promise made to the future, a small victory against the uncertainty of the seasons. Not all of the day's catch will be dried or salted. Some will be eaten fresh, a rare luxury, for in winter even a single day without preservation would mean waste. The smaller fish, especially, may find their way to the cooking pot by evening, their flesh soft and sweet in a broth rich with herbs gathered in the brief summer months. But the majority will be set aside, transformed by salt and wind into something that can wait quietly for its moment to be used. The drying racks demand their own care even after the fish is hung. Each day someone will walk among them, turning the strips so that the air can reach every side, feeling for any hint of softness that should have been gone. If rain comes, the fish must be covered or taken down entirely, for moisture now would undo all the work of the wind. In the depth of winter, when the air is too still or too damp, the racks may stand empty for weeks, the barrels carrying the burden alone. The children watch this work with the same quiet attention they gave to the cleaning and sorting earlier. They know, even if they do not yet take part in the salting or the careful arrangement of the drying strips, that this is the part of the day that will matter most in months to come. They see their elders care, the way each piece is handled as if it were as valuable as any traded good brought from distant lands. It is not the size of the catch today that will decide how well the village fares in the lean months. It is how much of it lasts. By mid-afternoon, the barrels filled that morning are closed, their lids fitted tightly, their weight a satisfying measure of the work accomplished. They will be stored in the coolest, driest place available, sometimes in sheds near the shore, sometimes in the lower rooms of the houses themselves, where the temperature stays low enough to keep the fish sound. The racks will remain where they are, guarded by the steady wind off the sea, their burden lightening only as the moisture leaves the flesh, leaving it firm and dry. The fisherman pauses for a moment, standing between the rows of drying racks, his hands resting on the handle of the small knife he has used all day. The breeze lifts the edges of his hood, carrying with it the mingled scents of the drying fish and the cold sea beyond. Around him, others are finishing their own tasks, tightening the ropes that hold the racks steady against the wind, stacking empty barrels for tomorrow's use, washing knives in buckets of seawater before the brine can dull their edges. The work is quiet now, the earlier flurry of movement settling into the slow order of completion. There is a certain peace in this stage of the day. The sea has given what it will, and the men have brought it safely home. The threat of the morning's shifting weather has not come to pass in full, though the clouds to the north still hang dark and heavy. The beach is no longer crowded with boats and people. The tools are stored, the catch secured, and the tide has risen to wash away the marks of the morning's landing. What remains is the knowledge that the day's labor has added to the village's stores, strengthening the invisible wall they build each year against hunger and hardship. The fisherman runs his fingers over the surface of one of the sealed barrels, feeling the rough grain of the wood beneath his touch. It is solid, dependable, as much a part of their survival as the boat that carried them out in the morning. In its weight lies the memory of the day, the slow rowing into the open waters, the careful reading of the sea's signs, the patience of the catch, the return under a watchful sky. All of it is contained here now, in this simple heavy vessel that will sit quietly until the time comes to open it. As the light begins to fade, the racks stand like quiet sentinels above the shore, their pale burden catching the last of the day's brightness. The barrels are rolled into storage, the knives hung where they will be ready for tomorrow, and the beach falls still once more. The sea murmurs beyond, indifferent to the work done here, already moving toward whatever mood it will wear in the morning. But for those who live on its edge, this day is complete, its offering preserved against the hunger of the long winter ahead. When the day's work of preserving the catch is complete, and the barrels are rolled into their storage places, the beach quietens, but the fish themselves still have a journey to make. Not all will remain here in the village. Some will be eaten fresh in the coming days, some will be salted or dried for the long winter, but a portion will be set aside for trade, to be carried along the coast or inland, exchanged for the things this small settlement cannot produce on its own. For in medieval Iceland, as in all remote places, survival depends not only on what one can take from the land and sea, but also on what one can obtain from others who live in different conditions, who have access to goods and skills that cannot be found here. The marketplace is not a great square filled with stalls and shouting merchants. It is not even always in the same place. Sometimes it is the next village over, sometimes a seasonal gathering point where fishing settlements meet inland farmers, and sometimes for the larger trades, it is the harbour where ships from Norway or other distant lands anchor in the calmer months. But wherever it happens, trade follows a rhythm as steady as the fishing itself, not rushed, not constant, but woven into the year's cycle like the changing of the tides. The fish intended for trade must be of the highest quality, the salted cod must be firm, the flesh white and unspoiled, the salt clean and dry around it, the dried strips must be free from any sign of rot, the texture hard but not brittle, the flavour kept pure by the steady wind and the careful watch of those who tended them. The fisherman knows which pieces to set aside, his hands selecting them almost unconsciously as the preservation work goes on, the best portions kept for the best exchanges. On the morning when trade is to be done, these chosen goods are packed carefully. The dried fish is bound in bundles, wrapped in coarse cloth to protect it from damp, while the salted fish is left in its barrels, the lids secured and the seams checked to ensure no moisture will leak in or out. The loads are heavy, but they are carried with the quiet understanding that each piece is more than food. It is currency, the means by which the village can acquire the tools, cloth, grain and other necessities that cannot be made here. The path to the trading place may follow the coast, winding along narrow tracks that pass between cliffs and the open sea, or it may lead inland, across stretches of rock and grass where sheep graze in the thin soil. Sometimes it is travelled by foot, each man carrying a load on his back. Other times a small cart may be used drawn by one of the village's few ponies, sturdy animals bred for endurance rather than speed. The journey is rarely short, but it is taken without complaint, for the goods they will return with are worth the effort. When they arrive, the marketplace is a place of subdued activity, not the bustling chaos of distant cities, but a steady hum of voices and movement. There are fishermen from other villages, their goods piled neatly beside them. There are farmers with sacks of barley or rye, their harvests from fields that are too far inland to feel the salt spray. There are traders from the larger towns, bringing wool spun fine enough for warm winter garments, or iron tools shaped in forges far away. On some days there may even be merchants from across the sea, their ships anchored in the sheltered bay, their holds filled with things that seem almost exotic. Fine cloth, carved wooden chests, small luxuries that the village might purchase only rarely, if at all. The exchanges are quiet but firm. There is no fixed currency in most of these dealings. Value is measured in the worth of the goods themselves, in how well the fish will keep through the winter, in how much a bundle of dried cod might be worth in sacks of grain or lengths of cloth. The fisherman listens, considers, and makes his trades with care. ensuring that nothing is given away too cheaply, but also that the relationship between trading partners remains strong. Trust is as much a part of trade as the goods themselves, a trust that each will bring their best, and that each will deal fairly, for in a land where resources are thin, dishonesty can break more than a single deal. It can harm an entire community. Some of the trades are practical and immediate. A barrel of salted fish might be exchanged for a bag of barley that will be ground into flour before the month is out. A bundle of dried fish could bring back a new length of rope, woven from plant fibers that grow more plentifully elsewhere. But other trades are for things that will not be used right away. A small iron axe head to replace one that may break in the future, or a piece of wool cloth that will be sewn into warm tunics before the next winter arrives. The fisherman also sees things that he will not buy, fine trinkets, pieces of carved bone or bright-dyed cloth that might tempt in other places. Here, practicality outweighs beauty, and the coins of luxury are spent sparingly, if at all. Still, there is a quiet pleasure in looking, in seeing the work of other hands, in knowing that beyond their own shores, other lives are shaped by other labors. By the end of the day, the loads they brought are lighter, and the ones they carry home are different in shape and weight. The fish they gave is now moving away from the village, perhaps to another part of the island, perhaps to the mainland across the sea. In return, they carry back the things that will see them through the months ahead, the flour that will become bread in the dark of winter, the wool that will be spun into thread beside the fire, the tools that will keep their boats and homes in good repair. The journey back is quieter than the morning walk to the marketplace. The trades are done, the decisions made, and there is a sense of completeness in carrying home goods that will fill the shelves, the chests and the storerooms. The fisherman's steps are steady, the weight on his back no lighter in truth, but lighter in meaning, for it is the weight of provision rather than burden. When they return to the village, the goods are shared according to what was traded. Some belong to the fisherman's own household, others will be distributed among those who contributed to the catch or the preservation. Nothing is wasted, nothing left unused. In a place where the sea is the source of life, the work of trading its gifts is as important as the work of taking them from the water. As the day ends, the sun low behind the grey clouds, the fisherman looks at the new rope coiled neatly beside his door, the small sack of grain resting safely indoors, the folded cloth that will keep out the winter wind. Each of these things is a quiet answer to the questions the coming months will bring. The sea has given, the village has traded, and for now, the balance of need and provision holds steady. When the trades are finished, and the goods from the marketplace have found their places in storerooms, chests or corners of the small turf-roofed homes, the rhythm of life in the village shifts once more. The sea still waits at the edge of everything, and its presence can be felt even on the stillest days when no boat touches the water. But the fisherman's life does not end when the oars are pulled from their locks or the nets are hung to dry. There is always work to be done on land, work that is quieter perhaps, less dramatic than facing the cold expanse of the North Atlantic, yet no less essential to the survival of those who live here. The fisherman's home, like all the others in the village, demands constant attention. The turf walls, though thick and warm, are not unchanging. The wind and the weather slowly wear at them, loosening the earth and encouraging the grass to grow thin in some places. On a calm morning, the fisherman can be found outside with a spade in his hand, pressing new blocks of sod into the gaps where rain has worn away the old, packing them tight so that the house remains secure against the winter gales. In summer, the grass on the roof must be trimmed, not for neatness, but to keep the weight from becoming too heavy for the beams beneath. There is the matter of fuel as well. In this treeless landscape, wood is rare and precious, often gathered as driftwood from the shore after storms. The fisherman walks the length of the beach from time to time, scanning for logs or planks that have been carried in by the tide. When he finds them, they are hauled home, sometimes carried on his back, sometimes dragged across the sand, to be split into smaller pieces and stacked under shelter. In summer, peat is also cut from the bogs inland, dried in the weak sun, and stored for burning. These slow, steady labours ensure that the hearth will not go cold when the nights are long and the sea is locked in ice. The care of animals is another part of life beyond the sea. Even the poorest households try to keep a few sheep for wool and milk, hardy creatures that graze on whatever grass they can find among the rocks. The fisherman, like most men here, tends them when he is home, moving them to better pasture, mending the low stone walls that keep them from wandering too far, and shearing them when the season is right. Their wool, once cleaned and spun, will be turned into the warm garments that make the difference between comfort and danger in the long winter. There are the fishing tools themselves to think of, not only the nets and lines which must be mended regularly, but the boat which demands its own share of care. On days when the sea is calm and the tide low, the fisherman may turn the boat on its side and scrape away the growth that has clung to its underside, or caulk the seams where salt and water have worn the tar thin. These tasks are never urgent until suddenly they are, and so they are done steadily, little by little, before small problems become large ones. Life beyond the sea also holds its moments of quiet companionship. The evenings, especially in the seasons when daylight is short, draw families together around the hearth. The fire burns low, fed by the careful use of stored wood or peat, and the small space fills with the warmth of bodies and the murmur of voices. The fisherman sits at the table, repairing a section of net under the flicker of the oil lamp, his wife spinning wool beside him, the steady turning of the spindle as rhythmic in its own way as the pull of oars through water. The children may work at small tasks, carding wool, sorting dried herbs, or they may simply sit and listen as the adults talk of the day past and the day to come. There are stories too, not always grand tales, but memories of past seasons, of catches brought in under skies, bright with sun or dark with threat. The fishermen may speak of the time the wind turned suddenly, and they rowed hard against it for hours to reach the safety of the bay, or of a morning when the fish came so quickly that the nets were full before the sun had cleared the horizon. These stories are not told to boast, but to teach, each one holding a piece of knowledge about the sea, the weather, or the work itself. The seasons bring their own changes to this life. In the warmer months, there is more to do outside, tending small gardens where hardy vegetables are coaxed from the soil, repairing fences, helping with the shearing of sheep across the village. In the colder months, the work turns inward, focused on preparation and maintenance, the slow making and mending that will see the household through until the light grows long again. There is a quiet satisfaction in these tasks. They lack the immediacy of hauling in a fish from the deep water, the sudden pull of the line or the weight of a net heavy with the sea's gift, but they carry their own reward. Each repaired roof, each stack of wood, each sealed barrel of salted fish, is a small victory over the uncertainty of the future, a way of ensuring that the family will not want for warmth, food, or shelter when the sea is not kind. Sometimes, on days when the work is lighter and the weather holds fair, the fisherman will walk to the edge of the village and look out toward the sea, its endless grey surface shifting under the slow movement of wind and tide. He will stand there for a long while, hands resting on the handle of his knife or the haft of his oar, and think of the mornings when he will set out again, when the pull of the water will call him from the safety of the land. For even with all the work to be done here, the sea remains at the center of his life, the source of his food, his trade, his stories and his memories. But until that time comes again, life on shore holds him. The turf walls, the drying racks, the slow turning of the seasons, the steady labor of keeping a home standing against the wind, all of it is part of the same rhythm, as necessary to survival as the fishing itself. And in these quiet stretches between voyages, the fisherman finds a different kind of balance, one rooted not in the movement of the waves, but in the stillness of the land, a stillness that will be waiting for him when he returns from the sea once more. The turn of the year brings a slow tightening of the world. The days, already brief, shorten until they seem to vanish almost as soon as they begin, the pale sun barely climbing above the horizon before sinking again into the western sea. The wind comes more often now from the north, carrying with it the sting of ice and the low, steady moan that can be heard even within the thick turf walls of the houses. The sea itself changes, its surface darkening to a heavier shade, its swells rising higher and moving with a more restless energy, as though it feels the cold as deeply as the land does. The fishing boats, pulled far above the reach of the tide, sit on their keels in the hardened ground, their hulls coated with frost in the mornings, their oars stored inside to keep the wood from cracking in the bitter cold. There are days in winter when the water might seem calm from the shore, but those who know the sea understand that the surface lies, that beneath it, the currents churn hard and fast, and that a sudden squall could rise from the horizon in less time than it takes to row halfway to the fishing grounds. In this season, the risk is too great, and so the men turn their attention inward, to the work of enduring the long months when the ocean's gifts are locked away. Inside the fisherman's home, the light is dim for much of the day. The small window, covered in its thin layer of oiled sheepskin, lets in only a pale, filtered glow, and the rest of the light comes from the steady flame of the hearth. The fire is tended with care, the peat blocks or split driftwood added slowly so that each one burns as long as possible. Around it, the family gathers, their voices low, their movements slower than in summer, as though the short days and long nights have settled into their very bones. The work now is of a different kind. Nets are brought inside, draped over benches or hooks, so that they can be mended in the warmth, each knot retied, each fray carefully spliced with new fibre. The fisherman's wife spins wool beside the fire, her spindle turning in a rhythm that seems to match the flicker of the flames. The children help in their own ways, winding the finished yarn into balls, sorting small wooden floats, or simply listening as the older voices speak of past winters, of storms that rattled the doors and piled snow high against the walls. The nights are long enough to hold more than work. There is time for the telling of stories, the kind passed down from grandparents to parents to children, shaped by each telling but always holding the same core. Some are of the sea, of voyages made in calmer seasons, of strange creatures glimpsed beneath the waves, of storms survived by skill or by luck. Others belong to the land, tales of travellers lost in the highlands, of shepherds who saw lights on the hills where no fire should be, of winters so harsh that the sea froze along the shore. These are not told with fear, but with the quiet acceptance of people who have always lived with the knowledge that the world is larger and more powerful than themselves. Food is taken from the stores carefully, each meal measured so that the barrels and sacks will last until the spring fishing begins. Dried fish, hard and salted, is softened in water and boiled with grains to make a thick, warming stew. Now and then, if the catch in summer and autumn was good, there might be butter to spread on bread, or a small piece of smoked meat to flavour the pot. Such things are not eaten without thought. They are savoured slowly, for in the deep of winter, even the smallest comfort carries the weight of something precious. The weather speaks its own language during these months. There are days when the wind rises so fiercely that snow drifts against the houses, sealing doors and windows until they must be pushed open with force. There are nights when the cold is so deep that the air itself feels still, the stars above sharp and bright in the clear dark sky, the frozen earth crunching beneath the boots of anyone who steps outside. And there are rare treasured moments when the air softens, the clouds part, and the moonlight spills across the snow, making the village and the frozen shore shine with a light that seems to come from another world. In these long winter nights, time feels different. The hours pass not in haste but in a slow, steady flow, each one much like the one before it. The fisherman wakes in the half-light of morning, tends the fire, eats a simple meal, and turns to whatever work the day allows. By the time the light begins to fade again, the tasks are set aside, the shutters closed against the wind, and the family gathers once more in the glow of the hearth. The sameness is not a burden, it is a kind of shelter, a rhythm that holds them steady until the season turns. Yet, even in the heart of winter, the sea remains a presence. Its voice can be heard at night, a low, steady murmur beyond the snow-covered dunes. Sometimes the wind carries the scent of salt through the village, a reminder that beneath its restless surface the fish still move, unseen and untouched, waiting for the day when the boats will return. The fisherman thinks of that day often, not with impatience but with the quiet certainty that it will come, as it always does, when the light grows long again, and the storms loosen their hold. Until then, the long winter nights are endured with patience. The fire is kept burning, the food is measured carefully, the tools are prepared so that when the season changes there will be no delay. In the stillness of these nights there is also a kind of peace. a knowledge that for now the dangers of the open water are kept at a distance, and that the family is safe within the shelter of their home, surrounded by the warmth of shared labor and the slow passage of time. The long winter nights in the village are quiet, but they are never truly silent. Beneath the steady breathing of the fire, beneath the soft hiss of peat turning to embers, there is the gentle murmur of voices, voices telling the old stories that have been spoken in these houses for as long as anyone can remember. They rise in the dim glow of the heartlight, carried not with the urgency of news or the insistence of argument, but with the slow, measured tone of something that does not need to be hurried, something that is meant to linger in the mind long after it has been told. In the fisherman's home, the evening meal has been eaten, and the bowls set aside. The fire burns low, its light catching on the rough grain of the table, the dark beams above, the wool blankets draped across the benches. Outside, the snow presses against the turf walls, muffling the wind so that the room feels almost separate from the world beyond. The fisherman leans back, his hands resting on his knees, and the children, his own and sometimes those of neighbors, settle closer, their eyes reflecting the flicker of the flames. This is the time for the stories of the old days, and the room seems to know it. Some nights the stories are of the sea, for the sea has shaped the lives of those here more than any other thing. The fisherman might tell of the time his father rowed home through a fog so thick that the horizon vanished, steering only by the sound of waves breaking on the rocks he could not yet see, or of a winter when the catch was so scarce that the men took to the ice at the edge of the fjord, cutting holes with axes and lowering lines into the dark water beneath, hoping for even a single fish to pull up. These tales are not told as boasts but as reminders that skill, patience, and a willingness to endure have always been the tools by which survival is earned. Other stories reach further back, into a past that none in the room have seen but that lives on through the telling. There are the sagas of ancestors who crossed the sea from distant lands, steering by the sun and stars, bringing with them not only their tools and animals but their customs, their songs and their stubbornness. There are tales of storms that shattered whole fleets, of winters so long that people spoke of the sun forgetting its way north, and of springs that came suddenly, breaking the ice and sending fresh water rushing down from the mountains into the sea. The voices telling these stories change with the evenings. Sometimes it is the fisherman himself, his voice steady and low, the words flowing in the slow cadence of memory. Sometimes it is one of the older men of the village, a neighbor whose years have given him both more tales and more patience in the telling. On occasion the women tell their own stories, not of the sea itself perhaps, but of the times when the men were away, and the village kept itself alive through storms, sickness, and scarcity. These too are lessons, teaching the children that survival is not only the work of those who go to sea, but also of those who keep the hearths burning, and the food lasting until the boats return. The children listen with the half-serious attention of the young, their eyes wide at the mention of towering waves or sudden winds, their minds catching on the images of far-off lands or mysterious sea creatures glimpsed in the moonlight. They ask questions, sometimes interrupting, wanting to know whether the old boat was really so small, whether the fish were truly as large as a man, whether the seals that followed the boats in winter could have been something else entirely. The answers are given with the kind of certainty that comes not from proof but from belief, for in the stories of the old days, truth is measured as much by the telling as by the facts. There are darker tales too, spoken in quieter tones, of boats that never came back, of men last seen rowing into the mist who were later found washed ashore far from home, or never found at all, of years when the fish seemed to vanish from the sea entirely, leaving the village to rely on its stores until the very edge of hunger. These stories are not told to frighten but to remind that the sea is not a tame thing, that it gives and takes in measures of its own choosing, and that respect for it is the first duty of anyone who sets foot in a boat. On nights when the wind presses harder against the walls, the fisherman might tell stories of the land, of wandering sheep found buried in snow and dugouts still alive, of travelers lost in whiteout storms who stumbled into the village, guided only by the sound of barking dogs. These land-bound tales carry the same undercurrent as those of the sea, that life here is a negotiation with the forces that surround it, and that endurance, skill, and the will to help one another are the threads that hold the community together. Sometimes the stories drift into the old myths, tales of the Holder folk, the hidden people said to live in the rocks and hills, who watch the village unseen, of seals that shed their skins to walk on land as people, and of ghostly ships that sail silently through the fog, seen only by those who will soon be lost to the waves themselves. These are told with a faint smile, the line between belief and amusement never clearly drawn, for in a place where so much of life depends on things unseen, it is easy to let the mind wander into the possibility of the unseen world. As the telling goes on, the fire burns lower, its glow softening until the corners of the room are in shadow. The children's voices grow quieter, their questions fewer, as the warmth and the rhythm of the stories draw them towards sleep. The fisherman's voice slows, each pause between sentences growing a little longer, as though the tale itself is becoming drowsy. At last the story comes to a natural end, not with a dramatic finish, but with the quiet closing of a memory, the way a wave slides back into the sea without fuss. The room rests in the gentle silence that follows, the only sound the faint hiss of the fire and the wind outside. The stories of the old days linger in the air, weaving themselves into the fabric of the night, ready to be told again when the next long evening comes. They are not just entertainment, they are the threads that bind the past to the present, that remind each listener of where they came from, and of the unbroken line of people who have faced the same winds, the same waves, and the same endless turning of the seasons. In a land where the sea can take as quickly as it gives, faith is not a matter of luxury or idle thought. It is woven into the daily rhythm of life, as present in the fisherman's mind as the tides themselves. It is there in the quiet moments before a voyage, when the boat waits at the edge of the shore and the water stretches ahead in its vast, unreadable calm. It is there when the clouds gather without warning and the wind begins to press hard against the oars. And it is there too, in the nights when the waves are heard but not seen, rolling endlessly in the darkness just beyond the reach of the village firelight. The fisherman's faith is shaped by two currents running side by side. One is the Christian belief brought generations ago from distant lands, the church at the edge of the village, its small steeple dark against the pale sky, the priest's voice speaking of God's watch over all creation, sea and land alike. The other is older, less formal, carried in the murmured words and small gestures passed from father to son, mother to daughter, habits that come not from scripture, but from the long memory of those who have lived with the sea's changing moods for centuries. On the mornings when the boat is to go out, the fisherman often steps outside before the rest of the village is stirring, standing in the quiet with the cold breath of the Atlantic against his face. He murmurs a prayer, sometimes in the church's words, sometimes in his own, asking for safe passage, for fair weather, for a return to shore at the end of the day. These words are not long, nor are they spoken loudly. They are as steady and familiar as tying a knot or pulling on boots, a small act that feels incomplete if left undone. There are also the old customs that have never quite faded. Some fishermen will not whistle while at sea, saying it calls the wind. Others will never turn a boat's bow away from the shore without first touching the water with their fingertips, a gesture of respect or greeting to the vastness they are about to enter. A coin, a smooth stone, or a small wooden cross might be kept in a pocket or tied to the inside of a coat, not shown to others, but carried as a quiet shield against the unknown. The fisherman himself carries a carved token, given to him by his wife years ago, its edges worn smooth by the countless times his fingers have sought it without thought. On Sundays, when the weather allows, the village gathers in the small church. The path to it winds up from the beach, past the turf houses and the drying racks, until it reaches the simple wooden door. Inside, the walls are plain, the benches hard, the light falling in soft narrow beams through the small windows. The priest speaks of the Gospels, of the strength to endure hardship, of the grace that lies in the rhythm of work and rest. His words mingle with the sound of the wind outside, and the congregation listens with the same quiet patience they give to the sea, knowing that both the weather and the word have the power to shape their lives. But faith here is not confined to one place or 1 hour. It is in the small blessings said over a meal before the first bite is taken, in the sign of the cross traced over a child's brow before they leave to fetch water or gather driftwood. It is in the habit of looking at the sky before stepping out the door, not only to judge the weather but to acknowledge that each day begins with what is given. not what is taken for granted. The sea itself seems to demand a kind of reverence, even from those who speak little of belief. The fisherman has known men who call themselves not particularly religious, yet who will never set out without first pausing to watch the way the light touches the water, as though they are listening for a wordless permission to leave shore. He has known others who carry psalms in their minds, and recite them silently when the waves grow high, the rhythm of the words matching the rise and fall of the swell. There are moments when faith and superstition seem to meet, indistinguishable from one another. A fisherman might refuse to count the fish aloud while still at sea, believing that to do so would tempt the water to take the rest of the catch. Another might turn his head 3 times to the left after hearing the distant call of a certain seabird, a habit whose origin he cannot explain, but which he will not break. These are not practices questioned or argued, they are part of the texture of life, as natural as mending a net or storing fish in salt. In the darker months, when storms keep the boats pulled high on the beach, the church becomes a steadier point in the village's week. Services are shorter when the cold is deepest, but the act of gathering itself is a comfort, to stand among neighbors, to sing the hymns that have been sung for generations, to hear the priest speak of spring's return and the sea's renewal. Faith in these times is not about certainty, it is about endurance, about holding to the belief that the light will lengthen and the waters will one day be calm again. The fisherman does not think of his faith as something separate from his work. It is there when his hands close around the oars, when his eyes read the shifting lines of the waves, when he tastes the salt in the air and knows the tide is turning. It is in the choice to leave the fishing grounds early when the clouds thicken, to share a portion of the catch with a neighbor whose nets came up empty, to bow his head slightly when the first fish of the day breaks the surface, as though acknowledging that this moment is not his alone to claim. When he stands at the edge of the shore, looking out over the endless stretch of water, he feels both the weight and the gift of it. The sea has no memory of the prayers spoken on its edge, yet he speaks them all the same. He has no guarantee that the old customs will guard him from harm, yet he keeps them faithfully. For in a place where the horizon offers no promise, and where each return is its own quiet miracle, faith in God, in tradition, in the knowledge of those who came before, is as steadying as the oars in his hands, as necessary as the boat beneath his feet. Winter does not leave all at once. It loosens its grip slowly, as though reluctant to yield, and in doing so it teaches patience to those who live within its reach. The snow that has pressed against the turf walls for months begins to soften at the edges, trickling away in thin rivulets that run toward the sea. The daylight lingers a little longer each week, though at first the change is so slight that it is felt more than seen. A pale gold begins to return to the afternoons, and the sky, which has been the color of steel for so long, now shows faint traces of blue between the slow-moving clouds. The sea is among the last to change. For weeks after the land begins to thaw, the water remains cold and restless, still shaped by the winds that ruled it through the long dark. The fisherman knows better than to be drawn out too soon by the promise of open water. Early spring can be treacherous. A calm morning may turn into a storm-tossed afternoon without warning, and so the boats stay pulled high on the beach, until both the signs in the sky and the deep knowledge in the fisherman's bones tell them it is time. During this in-between season, the work shifts again. The frozen ground, once hard as stone, softens enough to be dug, and the small household gardens are turned over for planting. These will not feed the village alone. The soil is too thin, and the growing season too short. But the hardy vegetables coaxed from it will add freshness to the salted and dried foods still making up most of the meals. The fisherman works alongside his wife in the small patch behind their home, the air cool on his face, the sun weak but welcome on his back. The smell of the earth is sharp after months of snow, carrying with it the promise of growth. The animals feel the change as well. The sheep kept close to the village during the deep of winter are led to graze on the hills where the first green shoots push up through the old brown grass. The fisherman checks the low stone walls that mark the pastures, repairing where frost and time have loosened the stones. The ponies, their coats thick and shaggy from the cold months, are brushed and exercised, for they will soon be needed to carry goods, and perhaps even to help haul the heavier boats back toward the water. The boat itself demands attention after its long rest. On a still morning, the fisherman and his companions will tilt it on its side, letting the pale spring sun fall across the hull. The salt and damp of the previous season have left their marks, and these must be scraped away. Seams are inspected for gaps where the tar has thinned, and new caulking is pressed in with steady hands, sealing the spaces where water might try to enter. The oars are taken out, their handles sanded smooth where they have grown rough, the blades checked for cracks. Every repair made now is a safeguard for the months ahead. There is also the matter of the nets and lines, which have been mended indoors during the winter, but now must be stretched and tested in the open air. The fisherman works slowly, walking the length of each net, his fingers running over every knot, feeling for any weakness that might not have been visible in the dim winter light. Floats are retied, weights refastened, and the lines are coiled loosely to keep them from tangling when they are finally cast into the sea again. As the days lengthen, the village itself seems to wake. The sounds change, the muted tones of winter replaced by the sharper notes of hammers and saws as repairs are made to houses, drying racks and storage sheds. The voices carry further on the lighter air, and the children are outside more often, their boots leaving dark marks in the thawing earth. There is laughter now and then, but even in spring there is no idleness. The work of preparing for the fishing season is a shared task, and everyone has their part. The first trial voyages are cautious ones. The boats are carried back toward the tide line, their hulls easing once more into the water. The fisherman rows out just far enough to feel the weight of the oars against the current, to see how the boat rides in the swell after its long months on land. The air is still sharp, and the water slaps cold against the hull, but there is a familiar rhythm returning with each stroke, a rhythm that feels as much a part of him as the beating of his heart. These short journeys are not for fishing but for readiness, for the sea must be met with preparation, not assumption. The changing season brings changes to the meals as well. The first fresh herbs appear, gathered carefully and added to the fish stews, their scent filling the small rooms with something bright and green. The salted stores are still used, for the new growth is not yet enough to replace them, but each addition from the land feels like a step toward the fullness of summer. Bread is baked more often now, the flour from the winter trades still holding out but used with a lighter hand, as the promise of new grain in the coming months feels more certain. The fisherman moves through these days with a quiet steadiness. There is no rush. Spring here does not allow for rushing, but there is a constant forward motion, a slow gathering of readiness. He knows that soon the mornings will once again begin with the lifting of the oars, the pulling of nets, the long hours at sea. But for now, his work is balanced between land and water, between mending what winter has worn down and preparing for what summer will bring. In the evenings, the light lingers just long enough for a short walk after the day's work is done. The fisherman will sometimes follow the path up the low hill behind the village, where the view stretches out over both land and sea. From here, he can see the dark line of the horizon, the patches of snow still clinging to the higher ground, and the slow, patient changes that mark the turning of the year. The air smells different now, less of smoke and stored goods, more of thawing earth and open water. Spring in this place is not a sudden thing. It is a long conversation between winter and summer, a back and forth of cold days and warm, of grey skies and sudden bursts of sunlight. But as the days pass, the balance shifts. The wind, though still sharp, carries with it less bite. The snow retreats further into the shadows, and the sea, while never tame, begins to show a face less harsh. The fisherman feels it in his bones, the slow, sure movement toward the season when the boats will set out each morning, when the horizon will once again be the line between work and rest, between the known and the unknown. The fisherman's days are shaped not by a calendar of fixed dates, but by the quiet turning of the seasons, each one carrying its own work, its own mood, its own demands. A year in his life begins not with the new year marked in ink on a page, but with the slow lengthening of the days after the long winter nights, when the first signs of spring stir both land and sea from their cold stillness. The change is gradual, so gradual that only those who live closely with the natural world can truly feel it. A softening of the wind, a shift in the weight of the air, the pale return of sunlight to afternoons that had been dim for months. Spring is a season of preparation, of gathering the pieces that winter has scattered and making them whole again. The boats are pulled from their resting places on the high ground above the beach, their hulls scraped clean of salt and frost, seams are caulked, oars checked, nets stretched and repaired in the pale light of longer days. The sea, still cold and often restless, is met cautiously at first, short voyages close to shore to test the readiness of both boat and crew. On land, the gardens are turned, pastures mended, and the first green shoots coaxed from the soil. There is work enough to fill each day, yet it moves at a pace set by the season itself, unhurried but constant, as the village quietly readies itself for the months of fishing ahead. When summer comes, the rhythm quickens. The light lasts late into the night, the sun hanging low on the horizon but refusing to disappear, casting a gold that turns the sea to shifting metal. The boats leave early, the oars dipping into water that no longer bites with winter's sharpness, and they return in the bright, lingering evenings with their catch glistening in the wooden troughs. The drying racks above the beach grow heavy with fish laid out in neat rows, their pale flesh stirring in the wind, while the salted barrels in the storehouses fill one by one. Summer is the season of gathering, of taking what the sea offers and working without pause to preserve it. For everyone knows that the generosity of these months will have to last through the seasons when the boats cannot go out. Autumn arrives quietly at first, the air cooling and the light turning softer, but soon the changes grow sharper. The winds shift, the swells grow taller, and the mornings carry a crispness that speaks of frost to come. The fishing continues, but each day at sea is judged more carefully against the sky and the water. There is less room for risk now. On land, the last of the gardens are harvested, the sheep brought down from the higher pastures, and the stores checked and secured. The drying racks begin to empty as the preserved fish are packed away, barrels sealed and stacked in cool storage, their weight a comfort against the uncertainty of the winter ahead. Winter, when it comes, transforms the rhythm entirely. The boats are drawn high above the reach of the tide and set firmly in place, their oars stored indoors. The sea is still there, murmuring in the darkness just beyond the snow-covered dunes, but it is not a place to work now. It is a force to be endured. The days are short, the nights long and heavy, with silence broken only by the wind's low song. Inside the turf-roofed houses, the work turns inward. Nets are mended, wool is spun, tools are repaired, and the preserved stores are drawn upon with careful measure. Evenings are for stories, for the slow passing of time beside the fire, for the steady patience that winter demands. Through it all, the fisherman's life moves in a circle rather than a straight line. Each season carries within it the memory of the one before, and the preparation for the one to come. The repairs of spring hold the promise of summer's work. Summer's catch is salted and dried against the hunger of winter. Winter's stillness is used to ready the tools for the next spring. The sea is the constant thread, present in every season, whether it is a place of daily labor, or a restless presence heard but not seen. The year is marked by certain moments that do not change. The first time the boat touches water after winter's ice loosens its hold, the first truly warm day, when the air smells of earth instead of frost, the day when the drying racks stand full and heavy under the summer sun, the first morning when frost patterns the grass and the oars are lifted from the boat for the last time until spring. Each of these moments is both an ending and a beginning, a quiet marker in the turning wheel of the fisherman's life. There are years when the sea is generous, when the nets grow heavy with little effort, when the trades at the marketplace bring home more than expected. There are years when the weather is fickle, when the catch is light and the stores must be stretched carefully to last. But the rhythm remains, steady and unbroken, binding the present to the past and the future alike. The fisherman knows that his father's hands once did this same work, that his grandfather's eyes once watched the same horizon, and that those who come after him will feel the same wind and hear the same waves. A year in his life is not a story of grand events or sudden changes. It is a pattern of small, steady labors, of moments repeated until they become part of the body's memory. It is the weight of the oars in spring, the scent of drying fish in summer, the cool bite of the wind in autumn, the soft glow of the hearth in winter. It is the unbroken line of days shaped by the sea. each one flowing quietly into the next, until the year turns and the work begins again. And as the fisherman stands on the shore, watching the slow shift of the seasons across the water, he knows that no single day can be taken on its own. Each is bound to the ones before and the ones to come, as the tide is bound to the moon, as the wind is bound to the sky. This is his life, not lived in sudden bursts, but in the long, patient turning of the year, in the steady work that ties him to the sea, and to the land that holds his home. The passing of the seasons does not leave the fisherman untouched. The years settle on him, in ways that are both visible and unseen, marking him as surely as the salt marks the planks of a boat or the wind shapes the curve of the coastline. His hands, once quick and unscarred, are thickened with callus, the skin toughened and cracked from years of gripping oars, hauling nets and working ropes slick with seawater. His shoulders carry a quiet heaviness from the endless repetition of rowing into the wind and lifting the day's catch, a heaviness that lingers even on days when the boat stays ashore. The lines on his face have been drawn there by the sun and the salt, etched more deeply with each summer spent under a sky that rarely hides its brightness. The squint in his eyes is not just from age but from decades of watching the horizon, scanning the sea for changes too subtle for the untrained to notice. His hearing, still sharp enough to catch the creak of a rope under strain or the distant call of seabirds, is tuned to the sounds of the water in ways that others do not hear. The difference between the lap of the tide on a calm morning and the sharper slap that warns of a wind shift hours before it arrives. Yet for all the signs of age, there is a strength in him that comes not from speed or force, but from endurance. The weight of years has taught him to pace himself, to save his energy for the moments when it will truly be needed. He knows that a day at sea is not won in the first hour, but in the steady, measured work that carries through to the last pull of the oars. The younger men in the village might row harder for a time, but he rows longer, his movements economical, each one honed by long familiarity with the work. He feels the years most in the cold. The winter wind cuts more sharply than it once did, the damp settles more quickly into his bones, and the warmth of the hearth becomes a comfort he seeks sooner in the evening. He knows the signs in his own body, the stiffness in the mornings, the slower recovery after a day of hauling full nets, and he works within them, adapting without resentment. This is the way of things. No man expects to meet the sea at 60 in the same way he did at 20. The weight of years also brings a different relationship with time. The fisherman no longer measures his life in single days, or even in single seasons, but in patterns that have repeated themselves so often that they have become part of his own memory. He can recall, without effort, the way the sea smelled in the spring of a year when the catch was light, or the sound of the wind on the morning after the great storm that carried one of the village's boats far down the coast. These memories do not stand apart from his present life. They are woven into it, guiding his choices without him needing to think about them. He has seen the village change as well. Children he once saw playing in the shallows now take their place in the boats, their hands learning the same knots he tied when he was their age. Faces have come and gone, some lost to the sea, some to the slow passing of years, but the work remains the same, and so does the rhythm of life. The drying racks still stand above the beach each summer, the church bell still calls the village together on Sundays, and the tide still moves in and out as it always has. The fisherman carries the quiet knowledge that he is now among the older men, the ones whose presence on the shore is as much about watching as it is about working. He still goes to sea, still pulls his weight in the boat, but he also spends more time guiding the younger ones, pointing out the signs in the water, correcting the set of an oar, reminding them to check their gear before the day begins. His advice is not given in long speeches but in brief, steady words, passed at the right moment, when the lesson will be remembered. There is a pride in seeing the next generation take their place, though it is not a pride he speaks of aloud. It is there in the way he watches them row out in the early light, their strokes strong and sure, or in the way they handle the day's catch without waste or carelessness. He knows that one day, perhaps sooner than he likes to imagine, his own place in the boat will be filled by one of them, and he will watch from the shore as the oars rise and fall without him. But the thought does not sadden him. The weight of years is not only the weight of age, it is also the weight of having done the work, of having kept the rhythm of the seasons through storms and lean years, through times of abundance and times of scarcity. It is the weight of knowing that he has given to the sea and taken from it in equal measure, and that his hands, worn as they are, have helped keep the village fed and the traditions alive. In the evenings, when the day's work is done and the light fades over the horizon, he sometimes sits outside his home, watching the tide creep in across the stones. The sea's voice is soft to hear than it is out beyond the bay, but it still carries its deep, steady pulse. He thinks of all the mornings he has stood at the water's edge, of all the hours spent between the rise of the oars and the return to shore. The years feel heavy in these moments, but they are a weight he does not mind bearing. They are the proof of a life lived in step with the sea, of days strung together like beads on a line, each one shaped by the same wind, the same salt, the same unending movement of water against land. And when he rises and steps back inside, closing the door against the evening chill, he does so without hurry, without regret. The sea will be there tomorrow, as it has always been, and he will meet it in whatever way his strength allows. For the weight of years is not something to set down, it is something to carry, with the same quiet steadiness that has carried him across countless horizons and back again to the shore. The years have moved in their quiet circle, each one passing into the next without sharp edges, without abrupt endings. The fisherman has lived through countless mornings, when the oars slipped into the still water at first light, and just as many evenings when the bow of the boat touched the shore with the weight of the day's work behind it. He has known seasons when the sea was generous, and the racks above the beach hung heavy with drying fish, and he has known years when the water yielded little, and every meal was a careful measure against hunger. He has seen the tide rise against the stones in spring's soft light, and he has heard the roar of winter waves in the deep night, unseen but close enough to shake the walls of his home. And through it all, the sea has been constant. Not in mood, not in kindness, but in presence. It has been the horizon he has faced more often than any other view, the line that has held his eyes on mornings when the rest of the world was still asleep. It has been the source of his work, his food, his stories, and his fears. It has given him days of calm water that seem to stretch forever, and it has risen against him with a force that no man can match, reminding him each time that he is small, and that the sea does not bend to any will but its own. Now, in the quiet moments at the edge of the shore, he stands not as the young man who first learned to row beneath his father's watchful eye, nor as the strong-armed fisherman who spent entire days pulling heavy nets against the tide. He stands as the man shaped by all those years, carrying the weight of them in his body, but also in his memory. The lines on his face and the ache in his hands are not burdens but records, each one a mark of the mornings faced, the voyages made, the storms endured, and the returns to shore, wet and weary but alive. The sea is before him now as it has always been, wide, restless, unending. The light of late afternoon falls across its surface in shifting bands, gold in one place, silver in another, broken by the slow rise of the swell. Gulls wheel overhead, their cries carried on the wind, and far out, the faint shadow of another boat moves across the water, oars lifting and falling in the same rhythm he has known for decades. The sound of the waves is steady, a voice without haste or urgency, the same voice he heard as a child, the same one he will hear until his last day. He knows there will come a time when he will no longer go out beyond the bay, when the younger men will take the oars and the nets, and he will remain on the shore, watching the boats grow small against the horizon. But that thought does not bring sadness, only a kind of acceptance. The sea will still be there, and he will still be part of it, not through the strength of his arms, but through the knowledge he has given to those who follow, through the memories that will live in the stories told on long winter nights. For in truth, the fisherman has never believed that the sea belongs to him, or to any one man. It was here before he was born, and it will remain long after he is gone. The most anyone can do is to share a life with it for a time, to work with its moods, to take what it offers with gratitude, to survive what it takes with patience, and to leave behind something that will help the next hand on the oar, the next set of eyes scanning the horizon. The waves reach up the shore, curling over the stones, and then slide back, carrying with them the faint hiss of sand and shell tumbling in the undertow. It is the same motion he has watched every day of his life, and yet it still holds him, as if each retreat is a breath, and each return is a heartbeat. The sea does not hurry. it does not end, it remains. He turns away at last, walking slowly up the beach toward the village, the sound of the water following him. The turf-roofed houses are warm with evening light, and the smell of peat fires drifts on the air. Somewhere, a child's voice calls, bright and clear against the deeper tones of the wind. The racks stand empty now. This is not the season for drying, but they are ready, as they always are, for the time when the sea will give again. In the quiet of his home, he sets aside his boots and sits by the fire, listening to the wind move over the roof. Tomorrow may bring calm or storm, plenty or scarcity, but he does not dwell on it. The sea will decide, as it always has. His place is to meet it with the same steadiness he has carried all these years, to rise when the morning calls, to step to the water's edge, and to take once more the first stroke toward the horizon. For as long as he can, he will do this, and when he no longer can, he will watch, knowing that the sea remains, the same water, the same wind, the same unbroken horizon, holding within it the lives of all who have lived beside it, the lives of those still to come, and his own, carried quietly in the endless rhythm of the waves. And so, as the light fades and the tide whispers against the shore, we leave the fisherman here, in the place he has always been, at the meeting point of land and water, time and memory. His story is not one of endings, but of continuance, of a life shaped and held by the vast patient sea. Close your eyes, and you can hear it still, the steady pull of the oars, the low hum of the wind, the soft unending breath of the waves. The sea remains, and in its rhythm, so does he.